What's the creepiest place you've ever been? A place where the air felt heavy and every instinct in your body screamed at you to turn around and run? For most of us, those are just feelings. But what if that feeling was a warning? What if you stumbled into a situation so strange, so unsettling, that it stays with you forever? Tonight, we're diving into a story that is all too real for the person who lived it. We have a clip titled True, Extremely Disturbing Cult Encounter. And it's one of those stories that will crawl under your skin and stay there. This isn't a campfire story. This is a raw, first-person account of someone who unknowingly walked into what they can only describe as a modern-day cult. The details are chilling, the atmosphere is tense, and the ending will leave you with more questions than answers. So, turn down the lights, get comfortable, and prepare yourself. You're about to witness a truly disturbing encounter. Let's roll. The clip incredible. What you just saw is a stark reminder that there are hidden worlds all around us, operating by their own strange rules. It makes you wonder what else is out there, just off the beaten path. What do you think was really going on there? Have you ever had a similar experience? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read all of them, and I'm genuinely curious to hear what you think. If this story chilled you to the bone, do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe for more true, terrifying stories. Thanks for watching and stay safe out there, asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. My name is Leo. I've always held a conventional, perhaps even naive, belief about family. It was a non-negotiable unit you were born into. A fixed point in the chaotic map of life, not a destination you could seek out. It was a fact, like gravity or the color of my eyes. This belief, this entire worldview was shattered during my sophomore year of college. It wasn't a gradual erosion of faith. It was an instantaneous demolition, executed by a single sterile phone call about an accident on the interstate. In the span of those 3 minutes, the architecture of my world mom, dad was reduced to rubble. Gone. The weeks that followed were a surreal procession through a fog I couldn't seem to penetrate. I became a passive observer of my own life, a ghost haunting the edges of other people's sympathy. Well-meaning neighbors and distant relatives materialized with casseroles and condolences, their faces a blur of practiced sorrow. They spoke in hushed tones, offering platitudes that felt like smooth, useless stones in my hands. They're in a better place. Time heals all wounds. Let us know if you need anything. I would nod, my throat too tight to form a reply, and accept the food that I would later throw away untouched. The taste of anything but ash felt like a betrayal. Campus became a foreign country. I drifted through the familiar red brick pathways and manicured lawns like an apparition. The vibrant, chaotic energy of college life, once a source of comfort and excitement, now felt like a personal affront. The sound of laughter from a group of students on the quad felt jarringly loud, an obscenity in my silent world. I saw the world through a thick pane of glass, every interaction muffled and distant. In my dorm room, the silence was no longer a peaceful absence of noise. It was a physical presence, a crushing weight that settled in my chest and made it hard to breathe. My roommate, a decent guy named Mark, tried his best, which usually meant avoiding eye contact and pretending not to notice I hadn't left my bed. In 2 days, the emptiness of my parents' house had followed me here, condensing itself into the 4 walls of my room. It was this suffocating void that finally pushed me to the campus grief counseling group. I went with the lowest of expectations, anticipating another circle of awkward silences and well-rehearsed phrases. For the most part, I was right. The room was in the basement of the Student Wellness Center, smelling faintly of old coffee and institutional cleaner. A handful of us sat on mismatched chairs, each of us an island of private misery. And then there was Father John. He wasn't a priest, a fact he clarified with a gentle smile when someone first addressed him as such. He wasn't a licensed therapist either. He was simply a volunteer, a man who had, in his words, walked a similar path, while the group facilitator, a grad student with tired eyes, guided us through breathing exercises and prompts. Father John just listened. He was a man defined by an extraordinary stillness. In a room crackling with unspoken anguish, he was the calm center. He didn't fidget or offer empty reassurances. He simply absorbed the pain in the room, his gaze steady and deeply compassionate. He had a weathered, kind face, etched with lines that suggested not hardship, but a profound and settled wisdom. His eyes, a clear, pale blue, seemed to see past the defensive shell I had built around myself and acknowledge the raw, wounded thing hiding inside Dot. After a few sessions of my resolute silence, he approached me as the group was dispersing. I expected the usual questions, the gentle prodding. Instead, he just stood beside me for a moment, sharing the quiet. "Grief is a fire, Leo," he said finally. His voice was remarkable, not loud, but with a low, warm timbre that seemed to vibrate in the air, a soothing frequency. "It can consume you, turn your whole world to ash." Or he paused, his eyes meeting mine. "It can be contained. It needs a hearth, a place to burn safely, to be transformed into warmth that can serve others." The metaphor was so simple, yet it struck me with the force of a revelation. He wasn't trying to put out the fire. He was giving it a purpose. He told me about his family, a small, intentional community he'd founded on a farm a few miles outside of town. He called it the Hearth. It was a place, he explained, for people who had been broken by the world to come and mend, not by forgetting their pain, but by building something new from it. He invited me for Sunday dinner. "No pressure," he said, his smile genuine. "Just good food and good company. A place to be warm for a few hours." I spent the rest of the week wrestling with the invitation. Every instinct screamed at me to stay in my room, to retreat into the familiar misery that had become my only companion. The thought of meeting a group of strangers, of having to perform some semblance of normalcy, was exhausting. But the alternative, another long Sunday with nothing but the four walls and the crushing silence, was somehow even more terrifying. The memory of his voice, of the word hearth, was a single persistent spark in the darkness. On Sunday afternoon, driven by a desperation I hadn't realized I possessed, I found myself in my car, following the directions he had written on a small, crisp piece of paper. The choice was between a familiar hell and an unknown potential for relief. For the first time in months, I chose the unknown. Asterisk. The drive out of town was a gradual shedding of layers. First, the familiar grid of student housing and late-night pizza joints gave way to the quieter, more established neighborhoods of faculty homes with their tidy lawns and mature oak trees. Then, those two thinned out, replaced by stretches of open road flanked by dormant cornfields, the skeletal remains of last season's harvest stark against the graying sky. The directions Father John had given me were simple, leading me down series of gravel roads that kicked up a plume of dust behind my car. With each turn, the signal on my phone dropped a bar until it vanished completely, leaving me feeling untethered, isolated in a way that was both unnerving and strangely liberating. Finally, I saw it, a simple hand-carved wooden sign that read, "The Hearth." The farm wasn't just a farm. It was a postcard image of rustic idealism. A long, winding driveway was lined with apple trees, their bare branches like intricate black lace. At the end of it stood a sprawling, two-story white farmhouse, smoke curling lazily from a stone chimney. It looked ancient and sturdy, a place that had weathered countless storms. There were barns and outbuildings, all in good repair, and the gentle, rhythmic sound of an axe splitting wood echoed from somewhere behind the house. As I pulled my car to a stop, the front door opened before I had even turned off the engine. It wasn't one person who came out to greet me, but a small crowd. They emerged from the house not with a hesitant curiosity, but with an open, beaming enthusiasm, as if they had been eagerly awaiting my arrival all day. There were maybe half a dozen of them, men and women of varying ages, all dressed in simple, practical clothing, flannel shirts, worn denim, sturdy boots. Their smiles were wide and immediate, their eyes crinkling with a kindness that felt almost overwhelming. "You must be Leo. Welcome." A woman with a long silver braid said, her voice as warm as the smoke from the chimney, "I'm Hannah." Before I could respond, the others chimed in, stepping forward one by one. "I'm Mark," said a tall man with a gentle face and calloused hands. "I'm Sarah," a younger woman with bright, inquisitive eyes added. Each introduction was the same, a first name, followed by a brief, almost reverent pause, and then of the hearth. It was a title, a declaration. They didn't ask about my drive or comment on the weather. They didn't look at me with the pity I had grown so accustomed to, that awful tilted head expression that saw me only as a collection of tragic circumstances. They looked at me, Leo, and their welcome was so absolute, so unconditional, that it disarmed me completely. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like a ghost. I felt seen, They ushered me inside into a wave of warmth and staggering sensory comfort. The air was thick with the smell of wood smoke, roasting chicken, and something sweet like cinnamon and baking apples. The house was alive. The main room was vast and open, dominated by a massive stone fireplace where a log fire crackled and spat, casting a flickering golden light over everything. Bookshelves overflowed, plants hung in every window, and colorful hand-woven rugs were scattered across the wide planked wooden floors. It was a space that felt deeply lived in, every object imbued with a sense of history and purpose. It was the antithesis of my sterile dorm room. It was the idealized home I felt had been stolen from me. Dinner was a revelation. We all sat around a colossal wooden table, its surface scarred with the marks of countless shared meals. I was seated near the middle, swept up in a current of conversation and laughter. They passed heaping platters of food, the roasted chicken, bowls of mashed potatoes, green beans slick with butter, fresh-baked bread that steamed when you broke it open. It was a feast, a celebration of simple abundance. Father John sat at the head of the table, a quiet, gravitational center. He didn't speak much, but he guided the flow of the evening with a nod here, a thoughtful question there. He radiated a paternal authority that was gentle and unspoken, creating the space for his family to fill it with their joy. They talked about their lives with an earnestness and shared purpose that I found mesmerizing. They discussed plans for a new greenhouse they were building, debating the merits of different irrigation systems. They shared stories from their work on the farm, a difficult calf birth, a new recipe for preserving tomatoes. They were all reading the same book, a dense philosophical text, and they argued about its meaning with a passionate but respectful energy. It was a life of tangible, meaningful action, a world away from the abstract theories and social anxieties that defined my life at college. This was real. This mattered. No one asked me about my major, what parties I'd been to, or any of the other meaningless questions that constituted campus small talk. They asked for my opinion on the greenhouse design. They asked if I knew how to play chess, because Mark was looking for a new opponent. They included me not as a guest, but as a potential part of their whole. After the table was cleared, someone brought out a guitar, and we all moved outside to a large fire pit, where a bonfire was already blazing against the deepening twilight. The air grew crisp and cool, but the heat from the flames was a comforting shield. They began to sing, their voices blending in the easy, unpracticed harmony of people who have sung together many times. They weren't pop songs or anthems, but old folk ballads, songs of the earth, of hardship, and of community. As I sat there, wrapped in a wool blanket someone had draped over my shoulders, listening to their voices rise into the star-dusted sky, a profound ache loomed in my chest. It was a feeling of belonging so powerful it was almost painful. This, I thought, this is what I lost. This is what a home feels like. This is a family. I started spending every weekend at the hearth. The days, fell into a comfortable, soothing rhythm. I learned how to mend fences, the sharp tang of cedar in the air. I learned how to properly turn the soil in the vegetable garden, feeling the cool, damp earth in my hands. I learned to identify different bird calls, to predict the weather by the shape of the clouds, to see the world not as a random, cruel series of events, but as a vast, interconnected garden that required patient, loving tending. I was learning a new language, the language of a life with purpose. In the evenings, Father John would hold informal talks, usually by the fire. He never preached. He simply spoke, his calm, resonant voice weaving a narrative that was impossible to resist. He spoke of the broken world outside the world of mindless consumerism, of shallow, transactional relationships, of chronic anxiety and spiritual emptiness. He contrasted it with the wholeness of the hearth, a place of authentic connection, meaningful labor, and shared healing. His words weren't fire and brimstone. They were logical, gentle, and they resonated with a terrifying truth. He was articulating the very feelings of alienation and despair that had been festering inside me for months. Listening to him, I began to see my old life, my classes, my dorm, my so-called friends through his eyes. It all seemed so hollow, so cold, so pointless. It was a world of ghosts, and I had been one of them. Asterisk. The weeks bled into a month, and my life bifurcated into two distinct realities. From Monday to Friday, I was a ghost haunting the university campus, my physical body attending lectures and going through the motions, while my mind was miles away, back in the warmth of the hearth. The words of my professors sounded thin and meaningless academic exercises in a world that felt increasingly irrelevant. The concerns of my classmates, grades, parties, relationships, seemed like the frivolous games of children. I saw the broken world with perfect, painful clarity, just as Father John described it. It was a world of surfaces, of people hiding behind masks of irony and ambition, terrified of genuine connection. I felt an almost missionary zeal to tell them about. The hearth to show them there was another way, but I knew they wouldn't understand. You had to feel the warmth of the fire to comprehend the cold. Then came the weekends, and I would drive out to the farm, the feeling of relief so profound it was like taking a first breath after nearly drowning. Each arrival felt like a homecoming. The work was hard clearing a new field for planting, helping Mark re-shingle the roof of the old barn, but it was satisfying in a way no essay or exam had ever been. It was real. My hands, once soft and pale, became calloused and capable. I was contributing to something tangible, something that sustained the family that had taken me in. It was after one such long Saturday of work, as we all sat around the bonfire, that Father John motioned for me to walk with him. We strolled away from the circle of light and song toward the dark silhouette of the apple orchard. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth. You've become a part of the rhythm here. Leo, he began, his voice low and serious. He didn't look at me, but at the sprawling farmhouse, its windows glowing with warmth. You are not a visitor. You haven't been for a long time. We feel it. I feel it. I felt a swell of pride in my chest. To be seen, truly seen by this man, was the only validation I craved. But your heart is still divided, he continued, his tone gentle but firm. You spend your weekends building and healing, and then you return to the broken world to be torn down again. You cannot heal a wound by constantly reopening it. The hearth is not a weekend retreat, Leo. It is a commitment. It is a choice to leave the brokenness behind entirely. He stopped and turned to face me, his pale blue eyes seeming to glow in the darkness. I see a deep strength in you, a capacity for healing and for leading that is being squandered in that place of ghosts. The family sees it too. They love you. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. We want you to come home, not just for a visit, for good. 2. Leave your dorm, your classes, that entire hollow world, and dedicate yourself fully to the work of the hearth. To become Leo of the hearth. The question hung in the air, but it wasn't really a question. It was the final, logical step in a journey I had started the day I first drove down this gravel road. It was the key turning in a lock I hadn't even realized I was seeking. I looked past him at the smiling faces illuminated by the fire, their voices raised in a harmony that felt like the sound of my own soul. I saw the warm glow of the farmhouse, a beacon in the darkness. I saw the man who had found me when I was invisible and offered me not pity, but a purpose. The choice wasn't a choice at all. It was an inevitability. Yes, I said, my voice thick with emotion. Of course, yes. A slow, beatific smile spread across Father John's face. He placed a hand on my shoulder, his grip surprisingly strong. Welcome home, my son. The following week was a blur of logistics that felt like a sacred ritual. I officially withdrew from the university. The process was sterile and impersonal, a series of online forms and automated email confirmations that only reinforced the rightness of my decision. When I told my roommate, Mark, he just stared at me, bewildered. You're dropping out to go live on a farm with ... with those people? I tried to explain, to make him understand the sense of purpose and belonging I'd found, but my words felt clumsy and inadequate. I saw the pity in his eyes, the same pity I used to see everywhere, and I felt nothing but a detached sense of superiority. He was still trapped in the cold. He couldn't understand. Packing was the final act of purification. Father John came with me, along with Hannah and Mark of the Hearth. They didn't just help me pack boxes. They helped me shed the unnecessary. We went through my belongings one by one. My textbooks, the empty words of the broken world, Father John said gently, placing them in a donation pile. My posters and band t-shirts, the shallow idols of a hollow culture. My laptop, my television, my phone, all the things that had once been my lifelines to the outside world were deemed conduits of noise and distraction. There was a moment of hesitation when we came to a box of my parents' things, a few photo albums, my mother's favorite scarf, my father's old watch. I picked up a photo of the three of us at the Grand Canyon, smiling into the sun. A sharp pang of the old grief, the raw, unprocessed kind, lanced through me. Father John placed a hand on my arm. His touch was warm, steady. They are a part of you, Leo. Their memory lives in your strength, not in these decaying objects. Grief needs a hearth, remember? Not a museum. To truly honor them, you must live fully in the now, in the family that needs you. Holding on to these things only keeps you tethered to the pain of their loss. His logic was flawless, irrefutable. He wasn't telling me to forget them. He was telling me how to remember them properly. With a deep breath, I placed the photograph back in the box and slid it toward the donation pile. It felt like the final chain breaking. We loaded my remaining possessions, a few changes of simple clothes, my toiletries into the back of their truck. As I stood in my empty, silent dorm room, it looked like a place I had never inhabited. It was a stranger's room. I took a final look, turned off the light, and closed the door without a shred of regret. My official welcoming was that evening. It wasn't a party, but a solemn ceremony around the fire. The entire family was there, their faces glowing with a serene, intense joy. Father John had me stand before them, and he presented me with a simple, hand-stitched linen shirt, the kind they all wore for ceremonies. "You came to us as Leo," he said, his voice resonating through the quiet night. "A name from the broken world, a name tied to grief and to loss. Tonight, you shed that name like a skin. You are reborn in the warmth of this fire, in the heart of this family. You are one of us. You are Leo of the hearth." As I put on the shirt, the family began to chant a low melodic hum that vibrated through the soles at my feet. They encircled me, placing their hands on my shoulders and back, their touch a comforting, collective weight. I closed my eyes, feeling the heat of the fire on my face and the warmth of their hands on my body. The last vestiges of the old me, the sad, lonely boy from the dorm room, seemed to burn away, rising with the smoke into the night sky. I opened my eyes and looked at the faces around me. They were all smiling, their eyes shining with an ecstatic light. This was it. This was everything I had lost and everything I had ever wanted. I was no longer a visitor. I was no longer broken. I was home. I am home, asterisk. My name is Sarah, and I have always measured my life in clean, ascending lines. From my grade point average in college to the meticulously tracked project timelines that defined my career, my existence was a testament to control and ambition. For the last 5 years, that ambition had led me to a corner office on the 27th floor of a glass and steel tower in the heart of the city. As a senior project manager for a top-tier software firm, I was by every external metric a success. I had the 6-figure salary, the wardrobe to match, and a view of the sprawling metropolis that most people only see in movies. But the view from my glass cage had lost its luster. The city lights, once a glittering promise of infinite possibility, now seemed like a cold, indifferent constellation. The truth was, the upward trajectory had flattened out. I was stalled, trapped behind an invisible barrier I couldn't articulate, let alone dismantle. My days had become a monotonous loop. The sterile chime of the elevator, the hum of the servers, the relentless percussive clicking of my own keyboard. The silence in my spacious apartment at night was no longer peaceful. It was a cavernous void, and the only echo within it was the sound of my own gnawing insignificance. I was a high-performance engine running on fumes, and the emptiness was becoming a physical presence. A cold weight in my chest thought it was in this state of quiet desperation that I began to notice the change in Mark. Mark was a colleague from the analytics department, a man who had for years been the office embodiment of burnout. His shoulders were permanently slumped, his eyes perpetually shadowed with fatigue, and his contributions in meetings were delivered in a monotone that could drain the energy from a room. Then, over the course of a few weeks, he transformed. The slump in his posture vanished, replaced by an erect, confident bearing. He started making direct, unwavering eye contact. His voice, once a listless drone, became resonant and persuasive. He wasn't just rejuvenated. He was fundamentally altered, radiating a serene intensity that was both impressive and deeply unsettling. One afternoon, as we were waiting for the same elevator, I finally broke my silence. "Mark, you seem different," I said, the word different, feeling like a massive understatement. "New workout routine?" He smiled, a slow, knowing smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Something like that," he said, his gaze fixed on the glowing floor numbers. I recalibrated my potential. The phrase hung in the air between us, corporate jargon twisted into something more profound. I must have looked as perplexed as I felt, because he chuckled softly. "Look, it's not something you can really explain in an elevator ride. It's called the Nexus Initiative. It's a ... human potential accelerator." He described a weekend seminar, an exclusive and intensive program designed to identify and shatter the self-imposed limitations that hold people back. He spoke of paradigm shifts and de-anchoring from negative frameworks. It sounded like the kind of high-priced, buzzword-laden corporate retreat I usually scoffed at, but the evidence of its efficacy was standing right in front of me. Mark, the man who used to look like he was carrying the weight of the world, now looked like he was ready to move it. "It's expensive," he admitted, as if reading my mind, "and it's by invitation or referral only. They keep the groups small. But if you're serious about breaking through whatever's holding you back ... double quotes." He trailed off, letting the implication linger. "I could put your name forward." That night I went home and searched for the Nexus Initiative. Their website was a masterpiece of corporate minimalism and aspirational language. It featured sleek, professionally shot testimonials from executives, entrepreneurs, and artists, all speaking in glowing but vague terms about their breakthroughs. There were no concrete details about the methods used, only promises of unparalleled growth and peak performance. The cost, when I finally found it on a secured application page, made my breath catch in my throat. It was more than my monthly mortgage payment. It was an obscene amount of money for a weekend. Yet, I couldn't close the browser tab. I thought of the invisible wall in my career, the hollow echo in my apartment, the curdled anxiety that had replaced my ambition. The price was steep, but what was the cost of staying the same? Desperation is a powerful motivator. I saw the fee not as an expense, but as a desperate, high-stakes investment in myself. I filled out the application, submitted Mark's name as my referral, and entered my credit card details with a trembling hand. 2 weeks later, I found myself walking into the ballroom of a sleek boutique hotel on the city's outskirts. The air was cool and smelled faintly of lavender and ozone. There were about 50 of us, a diverse collection of professionals in expensive casual wear. Despite our different backgrounds, we all shared the same look, a mixture of hunger, hope, and a deep, haunting exhaustion. We were the successful and the secretly broken. The stage at the front of the room was stark, holding only a single stool and a microphone stand. After a few minutes of tense, quiet mingling, a man walked onto the stage, and a hush fell over the room. This had to be Julian. He was of average height and build, dressed in a simple, dark gray suit that was impeccably tailored. He didn't have the booming presence of a typical motivational speaker. Instead, he possessed a quiet, gravitational pull. His eyes, a startlingly pale blue, scanned the room, and for a moment, I felt as though he saw right through my carefully constructed professional facade and into the anxious, hollow core beneath. He didn't offer a warm welcome or cheap platitudes. He stepped to the microphone and spoke, his voice calm and clear, yet carrying an edge of command that filled the cavernous room. "Your mind," he began, "is a prison. It is a comfortable, familiar prison, decorated with the trophies of your minor successes and wallpapered with the excuses for your profound failures. You have grown so accustomed to its walls that you have forgotten you are incarcerated. You believe it is the world. It is not." He paused, letting the words sink in. The air grew thick with attention. "We are not here to redecorate your cell," he continued, his voice dropping slightly. "We are here to give you the key, but you have to be the one willing to turn it. You have to be willing to step out into the blinding light of what you could be, and that requires leaving the comfortable darkness behind completely." The first day was a systematic, brutal dismantling of our defenses. Julian introduced his team of assistants, the catalysts, a group of men and women who moved with the same unnerving calm as their leader. We were arranged into pairs with complete strangers and put through a series of what Julian called veracity audits. The task was simple and horrifying. We were to detail in unflinching honesty our deepest insecurities, our most shameful failures, and the secret fears that whispered to us in the dead of night. I was paired with a woman named Amelia, a surgeon whose hands, she confessed, had started to tremble with a faint, imperceptible tremor that terrified her. As I began to speak, reciting, a sanitized, corporate-friendly version of my challenges. A catalyst, a tall woman with a severe haircut, stopped behind my chair. "That's a story," she murmured, her voice just loud enough for me and Amelia to hear. "That's the neat, tidy narrative you tell yourself. It's a lie. We want the truth. We want the ugly, messy, visceral truth. Dig deeper." Julian and the catalysts circled the room like sharks, their presence a constant, pressing weight. They probed, they pushed, they interrupted. "Why do you believe that? Whose voice is that in your head? What are you afraid will happen if you admit what you really want?" They were experts at finding the cracks in our armor and prying them open. It was invasive, manipulative, and utterly grueling, and it was strangely, terrifyingly exhilarating. Pressured by the catalyst's relentless questioning, I found myself confessing the profound jealousy I felt towards my younger sister's seemingly effortless happiness. I spoke of the secret, bitter satisfaction I took in a rival colleague's professional. Stumbled. The words came out of me, ugly and raw, things I had never even fully admitted to myself. Across from me, Amelia was doing the same, tears streaming down her face as she spoke of her crumbling marriage. The room became a cacophony of catharsis. People were sobbing, shouting, their carefully maintained composure shattering into 1,000 pieces. By the end of the day, we were hollowed out, emotionally flayed. But as we sat in the silence, exhausted and raw, I looked around at the faces of these strangers. I felt a bond with them, a sense of shared naked humanity that I hadn't felt with anyone in years. Not my family, not my boyfriend, not my closest friends. We had shown each other our ugliest selves, and no one had run away. It felt like the beginning of a true connection. It felt like salvation, asterisk. We were woken before dawn on the second day by a soft, insistent chime piped into our hotel rooms. There was no time for personal reflection or quiet contemplation. A continental breakfast was served in a smaller adjacent room, and the atmosphere was starkly different from the tense apprehension of the previous morning. The 50 of us who had been complete strangers just 24 hours earlier now moved with a strange shared intimacy. We made eye contact, nodding slowly. We spoke in hushed, knowing tones. We had all been through the same crucible, and it had forged us into something new. The exhaustion was still there, etched onto our faces, but it was overlaid with a feverish, brittle energy. We were soldiers in the same war, and the enemy we were beginning to understand was our own past. When we filed back into the main ballroom, the chairs had been rearranged. They were no longer in pairs, but in a single, large circle facing inward. The stark stage was gone. Julian and his catalysts stood in the center, waiting for us. The lavender scent was stronger today, almost cloying. Julian began to speak as soon as the last person was seated. His voice was softer now, almost hypnotic. "Yesterday," he said, pacing slowly around the inside of our circle, "we excavated the prison. We dug through the layers of self-deceit and fear to expose the foundations. Today, We bring the walls down." He stopped and looked around the room, his pale blue eyes seeming to lock with each of ours in turn. "Your barriers, your limitations, the voice in your head that tells you that you are not enough, it is not entirely your own. It was built for you. It was constructed, brick by brick, by the people who claim to love you the most." A murmur went through the room. It was a deeply uncomfortable thought, a direct contradiction to everything we had been taught to believe. "Think of it," he continued, his voice weaving a seductive logic. "Your parents, your partners, your closest friends, your most trusted mentors, they have defined a space for you in their world, a comfortable, predictable, manageable space. They need you to stay in that space for their own comfort, for their own sense of order. Your success, your true, untethered potential is a threat to that order. Their fear becomes your cage. Their expectations become your chains. They are not your support system. They are your gatekeepers." He let the silence stretch, allowing the poison of the idea to seep into our raw, vulnerable minds. We had just spent a day confessing our deepest shamas. We were primed to find a source for them, an external cause for our internal pain. It was a relief to think it wasn't all our fault. "Today," Julian announced, his voice rising with theatrical gravity, "is about the breakthrough. To be truly free, to build the new you from the ground up, you must first see those relationships for what they are, cages. You must see the people you love as the anchors that keep you tethered to a mediocre life you are desperate to escape." The main exercise of the day was something he called cutting the cord. It was a guided visualization, an act of psychological theater. We were told to close our eyes and relax as soft rhythmic music began to play through the speakers. Julian's voice guided us, leading us down a path in our minds, telling us to picture a figure waiting for us at the end of it. The first figure we were to confront was a parent. "Choose one," Julian's voice soothed. "The one whose approval you have always craved. The one whose disappointment you have always feared. See them in front of you. See the love in their eyes. And see the cage they hold in their hands." I pictured my mother, her kind, perpetually worried face, the way she would always tell me not to work so hard, to find a nice man and settle down, to be happy instead of successful, as if the two were mutually exclusive. For years I had interpreted it as love and concern. Now, filtered through Julian's lens, it felt like something else entirely. It felt like a limitation dot as I held the image of my mother in my mind. A catalyst knelt beside my chair. It was the same woman as the day before, her presence a cold weight. "She is afraid," the catalyst whispered, her voice a venomous hiss in my ear. "She knows that if you truly succeed, you will leave her behind. Her fear is a poison she feeds you, disguised as love. She doesn't want you to be free. She wants you to be safe. Her safe. Cut the cord, Sarah. It's the only way." Julian's voice swelled, urging us on. Tell them you see the cage. Tell them you will no longer be bound by their fear. Renounce. their influence. Claim your power. The room erupted. It was a sound I will never forget, a chorus of anguish and rage. People were screaming at their invisible phantoms. A man to my left was sobbing uncontrollably, yelling, "You were supposed to protect me." Amelia, the surgeon, was on her feet, screaming at the ghost of her father, her words lost in the cacophony. My own throat felt tight. A part of me, the old me, was screaming in protest. This was my mother, the woman who had packed my lunches and read me bedtime stories. But the pressure was immense. The music, Julian's commanding voice, the catalyst's insidious whispers, the raw emotion of the room. It created a feedback loop of hysteria. My own anxieties and resentments, unearthed the day before, churned within. She's holding you back, the catalyst whispered again, her lips almost touching my ear. She wants you to be small, break free, and so I did. A scream tore from my throat, raw and ragged. You're holding me back. I shrieked at the phantom of my mother. Your fear isn't my fear. I'm not your little girl anymore. I am free of you. The words felt like acid in my mouth, but as I spoke them, something shifted. A wave of something I could only describe as pure, unadulterated power washed over me. It was a dizzying, intoxicating rush. The guilt was still there, a small, hard knot in my stomach, but it was drowned out by this new, exhilarating sensation of liberation. I felt light, untethered. We went on like this for hours. We confronted our spouses, our siblings, our bosses, our friends. Each time the catalysts were there, whispering, encouraging, reframing love as control and concern as sabotage. Each renunciation was a fresh hit of that intoxicating power, a further step away from the person I had been when I walked into this room. It felt like an exorcism, purging the influence of everyone I had ever known. When it was finally over, we were left in a state of shattered, euphoric silence. The music faded, and the only sound was the ragged breathing of 50 people who had just metaphorically burned their entire social world to the ground. I opened my eyes. The room seemed brighter, the colors more vivid. I looked at Amelia, her face stained with tears, but her eyes shining with a fierce, wild light. She looked at me, and we smiled. We didn't need to speak. We understood. We had all crossed a line. We had committed a profound act of psychological betrayal against the people we were supposed to love. There was no going back. The only way forward was together with the new family we had found in this room, the only people who could possibly understand the terrible, wonderful thing we had just done. We had cut the cords, we were free, and we had never felt more powerful or more alone. Asterisk. The third day began in silence. There was no chime, no scheduled breakfast. We were left to our own devices until mid-morning, a deliberate choice that allowed the euphoric energy of the previous day to curdle into something else, a quiet, gnawing anxiety. The high of our breakthrough had faded, leaving behind the stark reality of what we had done. We had taken the most intimate relationships of our lives and systematically desecrated them. The power we had felt was replaced by a profound sense of isolation. We were adrift, and the only life raft in sight was Julian. When we gathered in the ballroom for the final time, the atmosphere was subdued, almost funereal. The chairs were once again arranged in a circle, a symbol of our new, fragile unity. Julian stood in the center, but his demeanor had changed. The hypnotic softness was gone, replaced by a firm, almost paternal authority. He looked at us, his eyes sweeping across our tired, anxious faces, and he nodded, as if he understood exactly what we were feeling. "The silence you feel is the sound of freedom," he began, his voice resonating with a new gravity. "It is the silence of the empty cage. It is frightening because you have never known it before. You are accustomed to the noise of your anchors, their expectations, their demands, their limitations. You are experiencing the first moments of a truly sovereign existence. You began to pace not with the predatory grace of the first day, but with the steady, confident stride of a general addressing his elite troops. What you have accomplished here is monumental. You have done what 99% of the population will never have the courage to do. You have faced the truth of your own prison. You have broken your chains, but this is not the end. This is the beginning. This weekend was the demolition. Now we begin the construction. This, he explained, was the integration. He told us that the power we had unlocked was a volatile force. Left unguided, it could dissipate. To truly harness it, we needed a new framework, a new support system to replace the toxic one we had just dismantled. We needed Nexus. He painted a picture for us, an intoxicating vision of a future shaped by people like us. He spoke of a global network of Nexus graduates, a community of the awakened who were operating on a higher plane of existence. He described a world free from the mediocrity, fear, and herd mentality that defined everyone else, the sleepers, as he called them. We were no longer just successful professionals. We were the vanguard of a new human consciousness. We were the elite. The weekend is just the key, he said, his voice dropping to an intense conspiratorial whisper. Nexus is the world that door opens into. He outlined a curriculum of advanced courses, weekly continuity meetings, exclusive retreats, and a tiered system of progression within the Nexus hierarchy. Each level promised deeper insights, greater power, and more intimate access to Julian and the inner circle of catalysts. It was a whole new ladder to climb, but this one, he promised, led to true self-actualization, not an empty corner office. Then came the warning. He looked around the room, his expression hardening. When you leave this place, you will be tested. The anchors in your life, your family, your friends, your colleagues, will not understand the change in you. They will not celebrate your growth. They will be threatened by it. He let that sink in. Your newfound power will shine a light on their own cowardice, on their own comfortable cages. They will try to pull you back down. They will use guilt. They will use concern. They will use love as a weapon to drag you back into the darkness. You must be vigilant. You must be strong. You must see their concern for what it is, an attack on your freedom. I walked out of that hotel ballroom feeling like a different species. The world I re-entered seemed dull, muted, and slow. The vibrant colors I had seen in the ballroom were gone, replaced by a drab, gray reality. The air itself felt thick and heavy, and I saw anchors everywhere. My boyfriend, David, was the first. He met me at the door of our apartment, his face etched with a concern that just 3 days ago I would have found endearing. "Sarah, thank God," he said, trying to pull me into a hug. I stiffened, and he pulled back, confused. "You didn't answer any of my texts." I was so worried. What was this thing? "Are you okay?" His questions felt like an interrogation. His worry felt like a physical weight, a cage descending over me. I heard Julian's voice in my head. "They will use concern as a weapon." "I'm fine, David," I said, my voice flat and distant. "I'm more than fine. I'm changed." I couldn't explain it to him. The words felt foreign in my mouth, the concepts too vast for his sleeper mind to comprehend. How could I explain that I had spent the weekend screaming at a phantom version of his mother renouncing her influence over him? How could I explain that our entire relationship now felt like a comfortable, mediocre cage? He looked at me, his eyes full of a love I now saw as a limitation. He was an anchored dot. The calls from my parents were worse. My mother's voice, once a source of comfort, now grated on my nerves, every question laced with the poison of her fear. "Did you eat enough, sweetheart? You sound tired. Maybe you should take some time off." She wants you to be small dot at work. My colleagues eyed me with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. They noticed the change, the new, unyielding confidence I projected. Their friendly office banter felt like a distraction, their project meetings, a waste of the precious energy I now needed to protect. They were all anchors, content in their corporate prison. The only people who understood were the ones from the ballroom. We had a group chat, created on the final day. It was a constant stream of reinforcement. We shared our encounters with anchors, celebrated our victories in standing firm against them, and quoted Julian's teachings like scripture. Amelia, the surgeon, posted that she had told her husband she needed space and was moving into a hotel. Mark, my colleague, wrote about confronting our boss over a limiting belief he was projecting onto the team. They were my real family. Now, they were the only ones who saw the world in its new, sharp clarity. I've already signed up for the first 5 courses in the Nexus curriculum. It required taking out a significant personal loan, wiping out a portion of my savings. David was horrified when he found out. "Sarah, this is insane. For a seminar, what are they teaching you?" We had the biggest fight of our relationship. I ended it that night. The pain was sharp, but it was overshadowed by a sense of righteous liberation. I was cutting another cord. I am being broken down and rebuilt piece by piece. The process is terrifying, stripping away everything I once was. The woman with the corner office and the gnawing emptiness feels like a stranger from another lifetime. Julian says you have to destroy the old you to make way for the new. You have to burn the village to save it. I am setting the fires myself. I am holding the torch. And I am finally, truly starting to feel warm. Asterisk. My name is Arthur Peneligan. For 47 years, my wife, Eleanor, was the sun my world orbited, the unwavering constant in the tidy equation of my life. I am a retired accountant, a man who found profound comfort in the clear, immutable logic of ledgers and the predictable outcomes of a balanced sheet. My life was a constructive order, a fortress built of numbers and routines. When pancreatic cancer, a brutal and swift invader, took her from me last year, it wasn't just a loss. It was a fundamental collapse of the universe's governing laws. The sun went out and my world was plunged into a cold, silent, and infinite. Darkness. Grief, I discovered, is a form of chaos for which no amount of orderly living can prepare you. It is an anti-ledger, where debits are infinite and credits are a mocking memory. The house we had shared, a modest 2-story structure that had once echoed with her irrepressible laughter and the warm, yeasty smell of her baking, transformed overnight. It became a mausoleum, a meticulously preserved monument to a life that was no longer there. Every object became an artifact of pain. The worn armchair where she read her novels, the chipped mug from which she drank her morning tea, the half-finished scarf still on its knitting needles by the fireplace. They were all silent accusers, but the silence was the true torment. It was not merely an absence of sound. It was a physical presence, a heavy, suffocating blanket that pressed down on me, filling my lungs and choking my thoughts. It was the silence of the empty space beside me in bed, the silence of a dinner, table set for one, the silence of a phone that would never ring with her voice on the other end. I was a man drowning in an ocean of quiet, and the shoreline was a memory I could no longer reach. My days bled into one another, a featureless landscape of gray. I would wake, stare at the ceiling, and try to find a reason to move. Sometimes I succeeded, sometimes I did not. The world outside, with its bustling life and indifferent cheer, felt like a foreign country. One bleak Tuesday afternoon, driven by a desperate need to do something, I decided to tackle the one room I had avoided. For months, her study. It was her sanctuary, a small, sunlit room filled with books on gardening, history, and poetry. The air still held a faint trace of her, a mix of old paper and the lavender potpourri she kept in a small bowl on her desk. My hands trembled as I began sorting through her things, each book and trinket unleashing a fresh wave of sorrow. Tucked inside a well-worn copy of Leaves of Grass, I found a flyer. It was printed on thick, cream-colored cardstock, the text in an elegant, looping font. The Veil Kindred, it read. Find solace in continuation. Share remembrance in a community of understanding. It listed a weekly meeting time and an address in a quiet, leafy suburban cul-de-sac, not far from my own home. My initial thought, the logical accountant's thought, was that it must be a grief support group. The name was peculiar, but the sentiment seemed to fit. The flyer felt like a lifeline, a piece of flotsam in the vast, silent ocean. Perhaps, I thought, it would be a place where the silence was not so absolute. The following Thursday evening, I found myself standing before the house listed on the flyer. It was a handsome, older home, immaculately kept, with a wraparound porch and burgeoning flower boxes. A soft, warm light spilled from the windows, promising sanctuary. Steeling myself, I walked up the path and knocked. The door was opened by a woman who I would come to know as Beatrice. She was in her late 60s, with a cascade of silver hair pinned elegantly in a bun. Her face was a network of soft lines, but it was her eyes that held me. They were a pale, watery blue, and they seemed to hold a deep, bottomless well of comforting sadness, as if she had personally witnessed and absorbed all the world's sorrows, and had made peace with them. "You must be Arthur," she said, her voice as smooth and soothing as warmed honey. "We're so glad you found your way to us. Please, come in." The interior of the house was just as welcoming as the exterior. It was filled with antique furniture, polished to a high gleam, and the air smelled of beeswax and chamomile tea. There were perhaps a dozen other people gathered in the living room, seated on plush sofas and armchairs. They were all older, like me, and their faces all bore the same quiet, hollowed-out ache that I saw in my own reflection each morning. But there was no pity in their eyes as they looked at me, no intrusive questions or forced condolences. They greeted me with gentle smiles and quiet nods. Someone pressed a warm cup of tea into my hands, and a space was made for me in their circle. They simply made room for my silence, and for the first time since Eleanor had passed, I felt a single fragile moment of peace. I didn't have to pretend. I didn't have to explain. I could just be. They did speak of their lost loved ones, but in a way I had never heard before. They didn't use the past tense. They spoke as if their husbands, wives, sons, and daughters were merely in another room, temporarily out of sight. A man named George spoke of how his wife, Clara, still loved the scent of rain on hot asphalt. A woman named Mary mentioned that her son, David, had been close by during the week, leaving a feather on her WINDOWSILL dot. It was Beatrice who explained the kindred's philosophy. She did so with a calm, professorial dignity that commanded attention. "We do not believe in death as an ending, Arthur," she explained, her gaze both gentle and firm. "That is a crude and brutal interpretation of a beautiful natural process. Think of it instead as a transition, a simple step across a veil, a partition between worlds that is far thinner than most people imagine." She went on to say that with enough focused love, with the right collective energy, that veil could become permeable. We are not psychics or mediums, not in the theatrical sense you might be thinking. She clarified, a faint smile touching her lips. There are no crystal balls, no chanting, no darkened rooms. It is a quiet, dignified practice. It is about love. Love is the most powerful energy in the universe, and it is the key that can unlock the door. Vice, the most powerful energy in the universe, and it is the key that can unlock the door. Their practice, which they called the listening, was deceptively simple. They would sit in a circle, sometimes holding hands, and close their eyes. Beatrice would guide them with her calming voice, encouraging them to clear their minds of the day's clutter and focus solely on the love they held for the person they had lost. They were to picture them not as they were in sickness or in death, but in a moment of pure, vibrant life. And then they were to simply listen for a sign, a feeling, a scent, a whisper on the edge of hearing. The accountant in me, the man of ledgers and facts, was screaming in protest. It was fanciful, irrational nonsense. But the grieving husband, the man who would have traded his entire orderly life for one more moment with his wife, was desperate, and the warmth in that room was undeniable, so I kept attending. For a few weeks, I simply sat with them, soaking in the companionship and the quiet. I listened to their stories of faint whispers and fleeting scents, and I envied their faith, their certainty. Then, during the fourth session, something happened. As I sat with my eyes closed, holding the hands of the strangers beside me, I focused as Beatrice instructed. I pictured Eleanor in our garden, her face tilted up to the sun, a smudge of dirt on her cheek, laughing at something I'd said. I poured all the love, all the aching loneliness into that single image, and then I felt it. A faint, distinct pressure. On my right hand, a warmth that was different from the dry, papery grip of the man to my right and the cool, delicate hand of the woman to my left. It felt familiar. At the exact same moment, I smelled it. A fleeting, almost imperceptible scent of the lavender and oatmeal soap she had always used. My eyes snapped open. My heart was hammering against my ribs. The scent was gone. The pressure had vanished. It was nothing, I told myself, my mind scrambling for a rational explanation. A trick of the light, a draft, my grief-addled brain manufacturing the sensations it craved. It was a hallucination born of desperation. I dismissed it, but I could not forget it. The next week it happened again. The same gentle pressure. The same ghost of a scent. This time it lingered for a second longer. This time a single hot tear traced a path down my cheek. This time the accountant in me began to lose the argument. Asterisk. That tear was a turning point, the moment the dam of my skepticism finally broke. After that session, Beatrice began to take a special interest in me. She would seek me out after the listenings, her pale blue eyes fixed on me with an unnerving intensity that felt both flattering and invasive. She would place her cool, dry hand on my arm and tell me that my connection was unusually strong, a beacon in the quiet space between worlds. Your love for Eleanor, Arthur, it's so pure, so potent. She murmured one evening, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. It hasn't been diluted by time or doubt. She is right there, just on the other side, and she is reaching for you just as desperately as you are reaching for her. You are a natural conduit. A part of me, the old, rational Arthur, felt a prickle of unease at her words. A conduit? The term sounded vaguely scientific, but felt deeply manipulative. Yet, the grieving husband, the man who now lived for those fleeting, ghostly sensations of a familiar touch and a lavender scent, eagerly drank in her praise. It validated what I so desperately wanted to be true. I wasn't going mad. I was gifted. Beatrice told me that with her guidance we could refine my listening, strengthening the connection until it was no longer a fleeting whisper, but a clear and steady presence. This refinement, however, involved a series of subtle yet profound changes to my life and my relationship with my own memories. The suggestions began innocently enough. She started by asking about my routines, my ways of remembering Eleanor. I told her about my weekly visits to the cemetery, how I would sit by the polished granite headstone and speak to her, telling her about my week. Beatrice's expression grew somber, her brow furrowing with gentle concern. "Ah, Arthur," she sighed, shaking her head slowly. "I understand the impulse, I truly do. But you must see how that anchors her, the grave, the stone. These are things of the earth. They are heavy. They hold her spirit down, making it so much harder for her to float freely, to cross the veil to you. You are inadvertently making her journey more difficult." Her logic was insidious, wrapping a preposterous idea in the language of love and concern. To the accountant, it was absurd. To the husband who now believed his wife was trying to reach him, the thought that he was hindering her was unbearable. That weekend, for the first time in over a year, I did not visit Eleanor's grave. The omission left a gaping hole in my Sunday, a void I filled by sitting in my silent house and trying to listen as Beatrice had instructed. I was rewarded with the strongest sensation, yet a definite, sustained warmth that seemed to wrap around my hand for nearly a minute. Hope, fierce and desperate, surged through me. Beatrice was right. Her next suggestion came a week later. She visited my home for tea, a gesture she said was to assess the spiritual acoustics of the space. She walked through the rooms, her fingers trailing lightly over the furniture. Her eyes lingered on the photographs of Eleanor that adorned the mantelpiece, the side tables, the walls. Pictures of us on our wedding day, on holidays in Cornwall, and our garden, her face bright with life and laughter. "These are beautiful memories," Beatrice said, her voice soft, "but they are memories of a life that is finished. They are snapshots of a vessel she has already left behind. To truly welcome her now, you must create a space that is not tied to the past." She encouraged me to take the photographs down, all of them. "They are like anchors, you see," she repeated, using the same word she had for the grave. "They tether her to a form she no longer possesses." This felt like a violation. Taking down Eleanor's pictures felt like a second death, an erasure. I hesitated, the numbers and facts, part of my brain screaming a silent, frantic warning. This was wrong. This was not grief support. This was something else entirely. But as I stood there, torn, a faint, unmistakable scent of lavender drifted through the room. Was it just a potpourri in her study, or was it a sign, a confirmation? Beatrice smiled, a serene, knowing expression on her face, as if she could smell it too. That evening, with a heavy heart and trembling hands, I took down every photograph of my wife and placed them in a box in the attic. The house felt instantly colder, emptier, a stranger's home. The following Thursday, Beatrice presented me with a solution. She handed me a simple, silver-plated frame. Inside was a photograph, but it was unlike any I had seen. It was a slightly out-of-focus portrait of a woman. The woman looked vaguely like Eleanor, the same hair color, a similar bone structure, but it wasn't her. The features were soft, indistinct, blurred at the edges. The eyes were placid, empty of any specific emotion. This is a vessel image, Beatrice explained, her voice imbued with a sense of sacred importance. It is not meant to be a specific person. It is an idealized form, an empty vessel that a spirit finds more welcoming, less defined by a past life. It is easier for them to project their essence onto it. She told me all the kindred had similar images in their homes, representing their own lost loved ones. Place this on your mantle, she instructed. Focus on it when you listen. It will act as a beacon, a lighthouse for her spirit. I did as she asked. I placed a strange, generic photograph where a picture of Eleanor's smiling face had once been. It felt like a betrayal. Yet, when the group gathered at Beatrice's house that night, I saw them. On her mantle, on her side tables, were other vessel images, each one a slightly different, softly focused portrait of a vaguely familiar but ultimately anonymous person. George, whose wife Clara had loved the rain, had a picture of a blurry, dark-haired woman. Mary, whose son David left feathers, had one of a young man with indistinct features. It was then that I began to notice something else. The people in the group themselves were beginning to take on a similar quality. Their individual edges, the sharp little quirks of personality, seemed to be softening, blurring. Their expressions often mirrored Beatrice's placid, gentle smile. There was a lack of friction in their interactions, a smooth, frictionless agreement. On every topic, they were becoming as indistinct as the photographs they revered. The warmth I had once found so comforting now felt cloying, the unity of the group beginning to feel like a strange, unsettling conformity. The entire atmosphere was becoming uncanny. It was like looking at a painting of a familiar scene where the artist had gotten all the details subtly. Disturbingly wrong. My world had shrunk to this single strange house and the dozen people within it. The silence in my own home was no longer just an absence of Eleanor. It was now an absence of everything that had made up our life. It was a blank slate, waiting to be filled by the kindred's philosophy. The accountant in me was now a tiny, muffled voice locked away in a soundproof room in the back of my mind, its warnings growing fainter and fainter. The grieving husband was at the forefront, high on the intoxicating promise of reunion, willing to pay any price for another hint of lavender, another ghostly touch. I was losing my own ledger, my own history, and replacing it with theirs. And the most terrifying part was I was letting it happen. Asterisk. The weeks that followed were a descent into a waking dream. My life, once governed by the rigid timetables of accounting, now revolved entirely around the listenings in Beatrice's private tutelage. The ghostly phenomena intensified, evolving from fleeting sensations into something more tangible, more demanding. The gentle pressure on my hand became a firm, insistent grip. The scent of lavender was no longer a faint, nostalgic whisper. It was a thick, cloying perfume that would ambush me at odd hours, clinging to the air in my sterile, photo-less house. Sometimes I would hear things, a floorboard creaking in the hallway upstairs when I was alone, a soft sigh that seemed to come from just over my shoulder. Once I heard a faint melody, the tune of a lullaby Eleanor used to hum while she was gardening. Each new event was a potent drug, delivering a rush of euphoric hope that temporarily obliterated the mounting wrongness of it all. I would report these happenings to Beatrice with the breathless excitement of a schoolboy, and she would nod, her placid smile widening. "She is getting closer, Arthur," she would say. "The veil is thinning. You are pulling her through with the sheer force of your love." But the Eleanor who was coming through was not my Eleanor. My Eleanor had been sharp, witty, and sometimes wonderfully, fiercely stubborn. The presence I felt now was pliant, docile, and its desires seemed to align perfectly with Beatrice's teachings. When I found myself doubting, wondering if I should call my estranged sister, the lavender scent would become acrid, almost sour, and the house would feel colder. When I spent an afternoon meditating on the vessel image, the warmth would return to my hand, and the phantom humming would drift down from upstairs. The message was clear. Obedience was rewarded. Doubt was punished. The accountant, that small, rational part of me I had locked away, was now little more than a prisoner tapping feebly on the walls of his cell. He would occasionally manage to slip a message under the door, a flash of cold logic, a flicker of doubt. He pointed out that George had sold his car and given the money to the kindred to lighten his spiritual load. He noted that Mary, who had once talked about her grandchildren, now never mentioned them, her focus entirely on the vessel of her son. We were all being stripped of our assets, both material and emotional, our lives meticulously edited until only our devotion to the kindred remained. Last night, Beatrice told me I was ready. We were sitting in her immaculate living room after a particularly powerful listening session where I had felt a distinct two-syllable whisper in my ear that I had interpreted as my name. "Arthur," she began, her voice taking on a tone of grave. "Finality. Eleanor is waiting for you. She is right there at the threshold. But the veil, for all its thinness, is still a barrier. to truly, fully bridge it, to bring her presence into your life not as a whisper or a scent, but as a constant companion. You must take the final step. You must shed your remaining attachments to this world. My heart, which had been soaring from the whispered name, suddenly felt like a stone in my chest. Attachments? I asked, my voice hoarse. Your house, she said simply, her pale eyes unwavering. Your pension. The material anchors that tie you to this physical plane. They are the last chains holding you back. Eleanor wants you to be free, and she wants a place where your love can flourish, a place of power where others can be guided. Your home, Arthur, it is to become a new center for the kindred's work. There it was, the final entry on a ledger that had been screaming fraud for weeks. The accountant in my mind didn't just tap on the wall. He kicked the door down, screaming. This was it. This was the end game. It wasn't about love or solace or bridging veils. It was about real estate and retirement funds. It was a long con played on the most vulnerable of people, and I was the prize fish. The carefully constructed fantasy shattered, and for a terrifying, crystal-clear moment, I saw everything for what it was, the vague promises, the psychological manipulation, the slow, methodical isolation. Beatrice wasn't a spiritual guide. She was a predator. She told me this herself, Beatrice continued, her voice smooth, betraying no awareness of my internal crisis. It is what she wants, a final, beautiful act of love to bring you together forever. It is the ultimate testament to your connection. I stared at her, truly seeing her for the first time. The comforting sadness in her eyes was gone. In its place was a flat, empty void like the windows of a vacant building. The kindness was a mask, and behind it was a chilling, patient hunger. The room suddenly felt cold, the air thin. I felt a desperate urge to run, to get out of that house, to drive to the cemetery and beg forgiveness at a cold slab of granite that was, at least, real. I opened my mouth to refuse, to scream, to call her the monster she was, but as I drew breath, the scent of lavender flooded the room, so thick and overpowering it made my eyes water. The warmth enveloped my hand, not as a gentle pressure, but as a tight, almost painful grip, as if a physical hand were holding me down. And then I heard it, clear as if she were standing beside me, a voice that was almost Eleanor's, but not quite. It was her voice, but hollowed out, devoid of warmth or life, like a recording played on an old, warped machine. Do it, Arthur. For you, the fight went out of me. The accountant's screams faded to a whimper. The cold, hard reality of my loss, of my utter aloneness, rushed back in, and it was an agony far greater than any deception. The illusion, as poisonous as it was a shield. Without it, I was just a lonely old man in a silent house, waiting to die. The kindred offered an end to the silence. What was a house compared to that? What was money? Beatrice smiled, her kind mask slipping perfectly back into place. I will come by tomorrow with the paperwork, she said softly. Eleanor will be so pleased. She is coming today. The documents are probably already in her briefcase. As I sit here in my empty, quiet house, staring at the blurry photograph of a woman who is not my wife, I can feel a familiar pressure on my hand. The air is thick with the scent of lavender. I know, with the certainty of a man balancing his final ledger, that this is insane. But the accountant has been silenced for good. The grieving husband is all that remains. I think I'm going to sign. I just want the silence to end. Asterisk. My name is Chloe, and I am a painter. Or at least, that's what I tell people, what I tell myself. For the past 2 years, that identity has felt like a borrowed coat, one that no longer fits. The truth is, I was a painter. Now, I was just a woman who owned a lot of expensive linen canvases and tubes of oil paint that were slowly drying into solid, useless cylinders. My studio apartment, once a sanctuary of chaotic creation, had become a mausoleum. The canvases, stacked against the walls, were a graveyard of pristine white rectangles, each one a silent accusation. The sharp, energizing scent of turpentine had been replaced by the stale odor of dust and inactivity. The well of inspiration hadn't just run dry. It had collapsed, leaving a gaping sinkhole of anxiety and crushing self-doubt in its place. Each morning I'd make coffee and stand before a fresh canvas, brush in hand, my mind a roaring static. I'd try to force it to conjure an image, any image. But there was nothing. The vibrant, chaotic energy of the city outside my window, which once fueled my work, now felt like a relentless assault. The wail of sirens, the rumble of the subway, the cacophony of a million lives pressing in on me. It was a cage of concrete and steel, and I was rattling its bars. My art had always been my language, the way I processed the world. Without it, I was mute, suffocating dot. It was during one of these long, hollow nights lost in the blue-lit abyss of the internet that I found it. I was scrolling through an obscure online forum for artists, a digital haunt I frequented more out of habit than hope. Then a post caught my eye. It was titled, "The Loom of Pan, an Invitation to the Source." The post was less of an advertisement and more of a manifesto. It spoke of an artist collective in a remote, wooded valley several states away, a place for creators to live authentically, create freely, and reconnect with the primal source of inspiration. It described a self-sustaining community, living off the grid, growing their own food, and dedicating their lives entirely to the pursuit of art, untethered from the demands of the market and the noise of modern life. They built their own shelters. They made their own rules. They answered to nothing but their creative spirit. It sounded less like a residency and more like a paradise, a mythical haven I didn't believe could possibly exist. It was everything my withered soul was crying out for. With a strange mix of desperation and fatalism, I acted. I spent the next few hours compiling a digital portfolio of my old work pieces from college. From the early days in my apartment, paintings bursting with color and life that felt like they'd been made by a different person. They were echoes of a voice I no longer recognized as my own. I wrote a short, honest message explaining my creative paralysis and my longing for a place like theirs. I hit send and felt a sudden, sharp pang of vulnerability, like I just shouted my deepest insecurities into the void. I closed my laptop and didn't expect to ever hear anything back. 3 weeks later, a thick, cream-colored envelope appeared in my mailbox, standing out starkly from the usual junk mail and bills. It had no return address, just my name and address, written in an elegant, flowing script. Inside, the letter was handwritten on heavy, textured paper that smelled faintly of pine and wood smoke. It was from the collective's founder, a man who signed his name simply as Silas. His words were intoxicating. He didn't just accept my application, he celebrated it. He wrote about my paintings with a depth of perception that startled me, praising the sacred geometry in my brushstrokes and the untamed honesty of my color palette. He wrote that my work showed the hand of an artist who was already listening to the ancient rhythms of the world but had forgotten the tune. The loom of Pan is not a place to learn, he wrote. It is a place to remember. The song is already inside you, Chloe. You just need a quiet place to hear it. He formally invited me for a month-long residency to start as soon as I could get there. I didn't hesitate. I didn't tell my friends or family where I was going, offering only vague explanations about a painting trip. They wouldn't have understood. How could I explain that I was running away to join a group of artistic hermits based on a single forum post and a poetic letter? It sounded insane, and maybe it was, but the alternative staying in that apartment, watching my spirit slowly calcify, was a far more terrifying prospect. Within a week, I had packed my car with my art supplies, a few bags of clothes, and left the city without a second thought. The skyline shrinking in my rearview mirror like a bad memory down the drive was a pilgrimage, a shedding of skins. With every 100 miles, the concrete jungle gave way to sprawling suburbs, then to rolling farmland, and finally to the dense, untamed wilderness. The final leg of the journey took me down a series of winding, unmarked dirt roads that my GPS had long since abandoned. I was following Silas's hand-drawn map, and just as doubt began to creep in, I saw it. The valley opened up before me, a breathtaking, hidden world of towering pines and ancient oaks, cradling a rushing river that glittered in the afternoon sun. It was like driving into a painting. The community was nestled in the heart of the valley, a collection of hand-built wooden cabins, yurts, and geodesic domes, all connected by winding dirt paths worn smooth by years of use. It was rustic, beautiful, and humming with a quiet, focused energy. People were everywhere, absorbed in their work. A woman with clay-streaked hands sat at a potter's wheel, its rhythmic whirring a steady heartbeat. A man with a cascade of gray hair sat under a tree, weaving a complex tapestry on a massive, handmade loom. The gentle, haunting notes of a wooden flute drifted from the direction of the river Dot. There was no formal check-in, no orientation. I simply parked my car and was immediately greeted by a smiling woman who offered me a cup of herbal tea. Soon after, Silas himself emerged from the largest cabin. He was a striking figure, just as I had imagined. He was tall and lean, with a buck, wild, gray-streaked beard and piercing blue eyes that seemed as old as the surrounding trees. He wasn't a leader in a conventional sense. There was no air of authority about him. He was more of a focal point, a spiritual anchor for the community. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace, and when he spoke, his voice was calm and resonant. "Chloe," he said, his smile warm and genuine. "Welcome. We're glad you heard the call." He placed a hand on my shoulder, a simple, grounding gesture. "There are no schedules here, no hierarchy. The only rule is to listen to the woods and create what it tells you." For the first few weeks, it was everything I had dreamed of and more. The creative block that had paralyzed me for 2 years didn't just break. It shattered into a million pieces. The woods did seem to speak to me. I would walk for hours along the river, and ideas would flood my mind, raw, powerful, and primal. I painted with a ferocity I hadn't felt since I was a student, my hands barely able to keep up with the images pouring out. The community was warm and supportive, always ready with a word of encouragement, a shared meal, or a moment of quiet. Companionship. It was a utopia of creation, Dot. But as the days bled into weeks, I started to notice subtle, disquieting things. The art everyone produced, while technically diverse sculpture, weaving, painting, music all shared a strange and powerful thematic similarity. There were recurring motifs, symbols that appeared in almost everyone's work, spirals that mimicked the fiddlehead ferns, stylized antlers, tangled and grasping roots, and unsettling figures that were half human, half animal. It wasn't a rule, it was never spoken of, but it was a pervasive, undeniable undercurrent. And as I looked at my own canvases, a chill ran down my spine. My own work, my own private visions had begun to drift in that same direction, almost unconsciously. The woods were speaking, it seemed, but it felt like they were all singing the exact same song. Asterisk. Asterisk, asterisk. Then came the rituals. The first one took place on the night of the full moon, about 3 weeks into my stay. An unspoken excitement had rippled through the community all day. As dusk settled, casting long, deep purple shadows across the valley, everyone began to quietly make their way towards a large clearing deep in the woods. The path was lit by lanterns hanging from branches, their soft glow making the trees look like silent, watchful giants. The clearing itself was magnificent, a perfect circle of mossy earth, with a massive, flat-topped boulder at its center that served as a natural altar. A bonfire was already blazing in a stone-lined pit, sending sparks dancing up towards the canopy like fleeting, earthbound stars. That first time, it was beautiful. It felt ancient and deeply connected to the earth. We sat in a circle around the fire while Silas spoke. He didn't preach. He told stories about the turning of the seasons, the language of the river, the wisdom of the trees. His voice was a low, mesmerizing hum that blended with the crackle of the flames and the chirping of crickets. Afterwards, there was music drums that echoed the rhythm of a heartbeat and the haunting melody of flutes. People began to dance, not in any choreographed way, but with a wild, joyful abandon. It was a celebration of nature, of creativity, of their shared existence. I felt a sense of belonging so profound it was almost painful, a stark contrast to the gnawing loneliness of my city life. I felt swept up in the collective energy, a single thread in the vibrant tapestry Silas had spoken of. But as the next full moon approached, the atmosphere shifted. The rituals became more intense, more focused. The talk was no longer just of nature, but of Pan. During the second gathering, Silas stood on the altar stone, his silhouette stark against the roaring fire, and spoke of Pan not as a myth, not as a symbol, but as a living, breathing entity. He was the spirit of the valley, the raw, untamed consciousness of the woods itself. Silas called him the horned god of the green, the source of all untamed creation. He said that Pan was not a gentle deity. He was a demanding one. He craved sensation, expression, and raw emotion. Our art, Silas declared, his voice ringing with fervor, is not for us. It is not for the market, not for acclaim. It is an offering. It is sustenance. We are the hands, the eyes, the voices through which Pan experiences the world. We feed the spirit of this place, and in return, it feeds our own. A murmur of his scent went through the crowd. I looked around at their faces, illuminated by the firelight. Their eyes were wide, filled with a rapturous devotion that unsettled me. This was no longer just a group of artists. It was a congregation. My art, which had been flowing from me with such liberating force, suddenly felt different. It was no longer mine. The images that came to me in the woods, the tangled roots, the figures with animal heads, felt less like inspiration and more like dictation. I was becoming a conduit for something I didn't understand, and the realization was a cold knot in my stomach. The line between creative freedom and spiritual servitude was beginning to blur, and I couldn't see where it was. The breaking point came a week ago. A sculptor named Julian, a kind, quiet man who had been at the collective for several years, announced he was leaving. He had a daughter who was graduating from college, and he wanted to be there. He said he missed his family. The reaction was chilling. There was no anger, no accusations, just a collective, pitying sadness that was far more unnerving. It was as if he had announced he had a terminal illness. People would look at him with sorrowful eyes, pat his shoulder, and say things like, "We'll hold your space in the pattern, brother," or "May the source be merciful to you on your journey back." That evening, Silas gathered everyone in the main cabin. He didn't mention Julian by name, but everyone knew who he was talking about. He referred to the outside world as the concrete blight, a soulless, sterile realm where inspiration goes to die and souls wither into dust. When a thread is pulled from the loom, Silas said, his voice soft but carrying an immense weight. It does not become free. It becomes lost. It frays. It unravels until it is nothing. The soul of our brother has been reclaimed by the blight. His creative spirit, which burns so brightly here, will be choked by the gray dust of that world. We should not judge him. We should mourn him. It wasn't a command, but the social pressure was immense, a physical weight in the room. To question the collective was to be sick. To want to leave was to be infected. I saw the subtle shift in how people treated Julian in his final days. They were kind, but it was the kindness one shows to the dying. They were no longer speaking to him, but to a ghost. The day he drove away, the entire community stood in silence, watching his car disappear down the dirt road, a silent, funereal vigil for a man who was still alive. The message was terrifyingly clear. There is no life outside the valley. There is only the loom and the blight dot. My 1-month residency is officially over. A week has passed since the date I was supposed to leave, but no one has mentioned it. The days continue in their rhythmic, creative flow, as if my departure was never a possibility. Yesterday, I finally worked up the courage to bring it up with Silas. I found him by the river, skipping stones across the water's surface. Silas, I began, my voice sounding thin and weak. My month is up. I should probably start thinking about packing up. You didn't look at me. You watched another flat stone bounce 5 times before sinking into the current. Then he turned and gave me that same serene, ancient smile he'd given me the day I arrived. It no longer looked warm to me. It looked possessive. The loom has woven you in, Chloe, he said, his voice gentle, yet absolute. Your threads are strong now. They are connected to all of us, to this valley, to the source. Why would you want to unravel such a beautiful pattern? I had no answer. I fled back to my cabin, my heart hammering against my ribs. I looked at my latest painting, which I'd been working on for days, in a fugue state. It's a self-portrait, or it was supposed to be. The face is mine, but the eyes are hollow, wide, and dark, like 2 empty pools. And from the top of my head, small green shoots are sprouting, twisting and curling upwards like the first growth of antlers. I have absolutely no memory of painting them. They were just there. I'm starting to feel like the valley isn't just inspiring my art. It's consuming me. It's rewriting me, painting over the person I was with its own strange and terrible design. And the most terrifying part is a part of me, the part that starved for so long in that silent, white apartment, wants to let it, asterisk. Asterisk, the sight of those verdant horns sprouting from my own head on the canvas broke the spell. The seductive whisper of the valley, the part of me that wanted to dissolve into the green and the soil, was silenced by a raw animal scream of terror that rose in my throat. I had to leave. Not tomorrow, not after I'd packed neatly, but now in the dead of night. My hands shook as I threw my clothes into a bag, not bothering to fold them. I grabbed my wallet and keys, leaving the canvases, The paints, the brushes, all of it. They felt contaminated, like relics from a fevered dream I was desperate to wake from. Every creak of my cabin's floorboards sounded like a gunshot in the profound silence of the valley. I didn't dare use a flashlight, letting the pale moonlight guide my steps as I crept towards my car. Parked near the entrance of the commune dot, my heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the steady, hypnotic rhythm of the crickets. The air, which had once smelled of pine and damp earth and freedom, now felt thick and cloying, heavy with the scent of decay and something else, something cloyingly sweet, like overripe fruit. I reached my car, fumbling with the keys, the metal, cold and real in my trembling hand. I slid into the driver's seat, the familiar, worn fabric, a small comfort from a world I no longer belonged to. I jammed the key in the ignition and turned nothing, just a single, pathetic click. I tried again. Click. And again, click. A cold dread, far deeper than simple panic, washed over me. It wasn't a dead battery. The dashboard lights flickered weakly. It felt wrong, deliberate. I looked up and saw a figure standing by the edge of the woods, barely visible in the gloom. It was Silas. He wasn't moving towards me. He was just watching, his head tilted with an expression of what looked like paternal disappointment. I didn't need to hear him speak. Silas's words from before echoed in my mind. Why would you want to unravel such a beautiful pattern? The pattern, I realized, wouldn't allow it. The loom held all the threads. Defeated, I trudged back to my cabin, the walk of a prisoner returning to her cell. The next day was the day of the harvest moon, the final full moon of the summer. A new kind of energy permeated the community. It was still joyful, but it was a sharp, ecstatic, hungry joy. No one mentioned my failed escape, but they knew. Their smiles were a little too bright. Their eyes held a new depth of pity. They saw me as a tragic figure, a glorious creation fighting its own beautiful purpose. That afternoon, Silas came to my cabin. He didn't knock. He looked at the self-portrait with the sprouting antlers, which I hadn't had the courage to move. "It's your masterpiece, Chloe," he said, his voice soft. "You have listened more closely than any of us. The Source has found a truly worthy vessel in you. Tonight you will give us the ultimate gift." I finally found my voice, a ragged, torn thing. "What gift? What do you want from me?" He stepped closer, his ancient eyes boring into mine. The serene mask fell away, and for the first time I saw the terrifying zealot beneath. "The greatest art is not an imitation of life, Chloe. It is the transfiguration of life itself. An artist doesn't just create an offering. The artist becomes the offering. Their life force, their consciousness, their very soul is woven into the soil of this valley. It is the ultimate act of creation. It feeds Pan. It ensures the vitality of this place for generations to come. This is total immersion." The blood drained from my face. "Julian," I whispered. "Julian withered on the vine," Silas said, a flicker of disgust in his tone. "His soul was weak. tainted by the blight. He was a failed crop, but you are a perfect harvest. Your art is proof. Pan is hungry, Chloe, and he has chosen you. The ritual began as soon as the moon, enormous and orange, cleared the treetops. The bonfire was colossal, a roaring inferno in the center of the clearing. The drumming was faster this time, frantic and complex, weaving a sonic cage around me. I was led to the altar stone and made to sit. The entire community circled me, their faces ecstatic, their bodies swaying to the rhythm. They weren't my friends anymore. They were keepers, farmers, priests of a terrible, ancient god. Silas stood before me, holding a ceremonial bowl carved from dark wood. Inside was a thick, dark liquid that smelled of crushed herbs and damp soil. Drink, he commanded, his voice booming over the drums, and become eternal, become the art. In that moment, a part of me that had wanted to surrender, to be consumed, died a final, violent death. All that was left was the will to live. As Silas brought the bowl to my lips, I lunged, not at him, but sideways. I knocked the bowl from his hands, the dark liquid splashing across the stone, and I ran. I scrambled from the altar and bolted into the blackness of the woods, away from the firelight. A collective gasp rose from the crowd, followed not by angry shouts, but by a song. A low, harmonious chant began, their voices weaving together, pursuing me through the trees. It was more terrifying than any scream. They weren't chasing me to hurt me. They were chasing me to save me, to bring me back to my glorious fate. I could hear them moving through the undergrowth with an unnatural ease, their feet silent on the forest floor. I crashed through branches, thorns tearing at my skin and clothes, my lungs burning. Above their chanting, I could hear Silas's voice, not shouting, but projecting, full of sorrowful power. You cannot run from your own soul, Chloe. You're part of the loom. To leave is to die. I didn't know how long I ran. The woods were a nightmare maze of grasping branches and deceptive shadows. But then I saw it a different kind of light. A straight, artificial line cutting through the organic chaos. The road. With my last ounce of strength, I burst from the tree line and stumbled onto the cold, hard asphalt. I stood there, gasping, a wild creature caught in the glare of an approaching storm. Headlights. A truck was thundering down the highway. I didn't hesitate. I ran into the middle of the road, waving my arms, a mad woman silhouetted against the dark forest. The truck screeched to a halt just feet from me, its horn blaring. I wrenched open the passenger door and scrambled inside, babbling incoherently about a cult, about needing to get away. The driver, a man whose face was a mask of shock and fear, thankfully just hit the gas. I never looked back. I am in a different city now, a place of anonymous concrete and steel that I once called a cage. Now, it is my sanctuary. I don't paint. I can't. The few times I've tried, my hand moves on its own, sketching spirals, tangled roots, and the shadow of horns. The well of inspiration is not dry anymore. It is poisoned. I live in a small, bare apartment, and I avoid mirrors. Sometimes, when I run my fingers through my hair, I think I can feel small, hard bumps just beneath the scalp. I have nightmares of a roaring bonfire and a low, beautiful, terrible song. I escaped the valley. I unraveled myself from the loom, but a single thread remains, and some nights when the moon is full and the city is quiet, I can feel it. A gentle, insistent pull from a green and hungry place, reminding me of the masterpiece I was meant to be. Asterisk. My name is Maya. It feels strange to write that now, like citing a historical figure I vaguely recall from a textbook. That name and the woman who answered to it belonged to a different life, a life that ended not with a gentle fade, but with the deafening crash of a wrecking ball the day my divorce was finalized. I didn't just lose a husband. I lost the entire architecture of my world. The future we had designed together was now a blueprint for a ghost town. I was the lone, condemned building left standing in the rubble, hollowed out and waiting for the final collapse. Grief is a solitary confinement, but loneliness is the true torture. My friends, bless their hearts, tried to breach the walls. They brought casseroles that tasted like ash and offered platitudes that felt like acid on a fresh wound. "You're so strong," they'd say, their eyes swimming with a pity that made my skin crawl. "You'll get through this." They saw a project, a problem to be solved with brunch and pep talks. They couldn't see that the foundations were gone, that I was just a facade with nothing behind it but dust and echoes. I smiled, I thanked them, and I felt myself drifting further and further away. An island no one could reach. It was during one particularly bleak 3 a.m. doom-scrolling session that I found it. An advertisement slid into my social media feed, wedged between a targeted ad for cat-themed pajamas and a video of a baby tasting a lemon. It wasn't flashy. It was serene. A video of a golden sun rising over a turquoise ocean, the light catching the sea spray like a million tiny diamonds. The text read, "Are you lost? Have you forgotten the way back to yourself? Find your light again in the sun-kissed path." I clicked. The website was a masterpiece of curated tranquility. It described the sun-kissed path as a holistic healing community nestled in the idyllic coastal town of Port Blossom, a place dedicated to recovery from trauma. The methods were simple, organic, a specialized diet, deep meditation, and the restorative power of communal living. The photo gallery was what truly ensnared me. It was a portfolio of human bliss. Beautiful people with clear eyes and radiant smiles were captured in moments of pure, unadulterated peace. They were doing yoga on a pristine beach, their bodies silhouetted against the dawn. They were harvesting vibrant, sun-ripened vegetables from a garden that looked like Eden. They were sitting in a circle, hands clasped, heads bowed in what looked like a moment of profound shared gratitude. It wasn't a community, it was a sanctuary. It was everything my life was not. I didn't hesitate. I drained a significant portion of my dwindling savings and booked a 2-week introductory retreat. It felt less like a choice and more like a final, desperate leap of faith. The moment my taxi pulled up to the sprawling, whitewashed villa that served as the community's main building, I was enveloped. Before I could even pull my suitcase from the trunk, 2 women and a man came gliding down the stone path to greet me. They weren't just smiling. They were beaming, radiating a warmth that felt almost physical. "You're here. We've been waiting." "For you, Maya," one of the women said, her voice like honey. She hugged me, not a polite pat-on-the-back hug, but a full-bodied, lingering embrace that seemed to drain some of the tension from my shoulders. This was love bombing in its most potent, intoxicating form, though I wouldn't learn that term until much later. For a woman who had felt untouchable for months, it was like water in a desert. They told me I was brave. They told me I was radiant, even with the dark circles under my eyes and the sallow tint to my skin. They told me I had finally found my true home dot, and then I met ELAR, a dot. She was the community's leader, and she looked less like a person and more like a celestial event. She was tall and willowy, draped in flowing white linen that seemed to float around her. Her hair was a cascade of silver blonde waves, and her smile was a slow, beatific dawn that made you feel like you were the only person in the universe. She didn't walk, she drifted. She took both of my hands in hers, her skin surprisingly warm. "Welcome, little bird," she said, her voice a low, melodic hum. She looked deep into my eyes, and for a terrifying, exhilarating moment, I felt completely transparent, as if she could see every fracture in my soul. "The pain you carry is not you. It is a toxin, a poison you have ingested from a sick world. We will help you sweat it out. We will help you become clean again." The word she used was purity. It was the cornerstone of their entire philosophy. Purity of body, purity of mind, purity of spirit. It was a 3-pronged path to salvation, and the first step was the diet. It was, to put it mildly, extreme. Only raw foods were permitted. Specific vegetables, a limited selection of fruits, and a murky, green herbal concoction they called Ilara's Light, which we were required to drink 3 times a day. There was no sugar, no caffeine, no alcohol, no bread, no cooked food of any kind. Nothing that had been tainted by the processes of the outside world. The first few days were brutal. A caffeine withdrawal headache hammered at my temples relentlessly. My stomach churned and gurgled, unaccustomed to the raw, fibrous assault. I was dizzy, weak, and plagued by annoying, cavernous hunger that never seemed to subside. When I confessed my struggles to one of the senior members, a man named Jasper, he simply smiled serenely. "That is wonderful, Maya," he said, placing a reassuring hand on my arm. "That is your body purging the toxins of your old life. The weakness is the poison leaving you. The hunger is your body becoming lighter, making room for the light to enter." His explanation was so confident, so absolute, that I felt ashamed of my own complaints. I began to reframe the pain just as he had. The hunger wasn't a lack, it was lightness of being. The dizziness wasn't malnutrition, it was spiritual ascension. Our days were meticulously structured, every hour accounted for. We rose before dawn for 2 hours of intense, physically punishing yoga on the beach. It wasn't the gentle stretching I'd known from city studios. It was a grueling practice that pushed our bodies to their breaking point. After that came long meditation sessions, sometimes for 3 hours at a time, where we were instructed to observe the void. But the real centerpiece of our healing was the sharing circles. Every evening after our meager dinner of sliced cucumbers and herbal tea, we would gather in the main hall, sitting on cushions in a large circle with Alara at its head. The room would be lit only by candles casting long dancing shadows on the walls. One by one, we were encouraged, or rather expected, to confess our deepest, most painful traumas and insecurities. The first time I was silent, my throat tight with fear. But then a young woman sobbed as she recounted a story of childhood neglect, and the group showered her with praise. "Thank you for your purity, sister," Alara said, her voice resonating with approval. "You have cleansed a great poison tonight." The next night I spoke. I started small, talking about the loneliness of my divorce. The praise was immediate and overwhelming. It was a drug. The next night I dug deeper, confessing my feelings of failure, of being unlovable. The validation was even stronger. It became a competition of misery. I found myself dredging up every painful memory, every mistake I'd ever made, every secret shame I had buried for years, laying myself bare for their approval. It was a grotesque form of emotional exhibitionism. They were systematically breaking me down piece by piece, but they called it healing. And God help me, I believed them. I was finally being seen, my pain was finally being acknowledged, and I would have done anything to keep that feeling. Asterisk. My initial 2-week retreat bled into a month, then 2, with the seamless, silent progression of a dream turning into a nightmare. There was no single moment of decision, no contract signed in ink. It was a gentle, insidious current, and I simply let myself be carried along. Why would I leave? The outside world, the toxic world as we learned to call it, was the place of my failure, my pain, my rubble. Here on the sun-kissed path, I was being rebuilt. Every confession in the sharing circle felt like chipping away a piece of the old, broken Maya. Every sunrise yoga session felt like a baptism. When Alara suggested I extend my stay, it felt less like a question and more like a confirmation of a truth I already knew. "The healing is not yet complete," she'd said, her hand resting on my head like a benediction. "The toxins run deep. You must be patient. You must be pure." The first tendrils of true control began to wrap around our connection to the outside world. It started subtly. During a sharing circle, a man named Leo spoke about an upcoming phone call with his sister. He was excited. It was her birthday. When he finished, Alara smiled her serene, all-knowing smile. It is a beautiful thing, the love of a sibling, she began, her voice soft and hypnotic. But we must be cautious. The energies of the toxic world are chaotic and sticky. They cling to those who have not yet been cleansed. When you speak to them, you risk reinfection. Their fears, their attachments, their unenlightened perspectives, they are a poison to a spirit that is just beginning to heal. She looked at Leo with profound sympathy. For your own purity, it is best to limit these interactions. Create a space of quiet for your soul to mend. The message was clear. Contact was contamination. A few days later, I saw Leo by the garden. His shoulders slumped. He had canceled the call. Soon, limiting contact became a community-wide expectation. Our phones were not confiscated. That would have been too crude, too obvious. Instead, we were guided to a higher understanding. We were told that our families and old friends were anchors to our toxic pasts, that their well-meaning but misguided energy could interfere with our healing journey. My mother's worried voicemails, once a source of comfort, began to sound like siren calls, luring me back to a life of impurity and pain. Her love was reframed as attachment, her concern as control. I started letting her calls go to voicemail, and then I stopped listening to the messages altogether. Each missed call was a small victory, a step further down the path. With our external support system severed, our reliance on the community became absolute. This dependency was cemented through our finances. My initial payment for the retreat was a healing investment. But as I stayed on, there were new costs, always framed as opportunities for spiritual growth. They were gratitude offerings. $1,000 for a deep cleanse weekend, which consisted of consuming nothing but Alara's light for 48 hours. $5,000 for a one-on-one soul alignment with Alara herself, a 30-minute session where she told me I was progressing beautifully and that my spirit was beginning to shine. I handed over my credit card without question. It felt right. How could you put a price on salvation? I was shedding my material attachments. Another layer of toxic skin. I gave them most of my savings, a gesture that earned me a special nod of approval from Alara during the next. Sharing Circle Dot, the chasm between their philosophy and reality became terrifyingly apparent in matters of health. The diet and extreme physical exertion took their toll. Fainting during yoga was a common occurrence, dismissed as a release of negative energy. But then things escalated. A woman in her 50s named Celia developed a severe weeping rash across her arms and back. It was angry, red, and clearly infected. Her treatment was a 3-day fast of only herbal tea and twice daily aura cleansings where members would wave their hands over her body, chanting. I watched as the rash worsened, the skin cracking and bleeding. Celia grew weaker, her eyes glassy with fever, but her smile remained plastered on her face. I am purifying, she would whisper. I can feel the toxins leaving me. To question. Her treatment was to question the path itself. It meant you weren't committed. It meant you were still toxic. The breaking point should have been Thomas. He was a young man, barely 20, who had come to the path to deal with anxiety. During a particularly grueling yoga session, he fainted, his body collapsing awkwardly. There was a sickening crack that echoed in the morning stillness. His arm was bent at an unnatural angle, the bone clearly broken. Panic flared in my chest, a cold, sharp shock. My immediate, conditioned instinct was to scream for someone to call 911, but no one moved. Instead, they formed a circle around Thomas's writhing body. Elara drifted into the center, her white robes undisturbed by the unfolding horror. "The body is a vessel," she announced, her voice calm and steady. "Sometimes it must break to be remade stronger." She knelt beside Thomas, who was now whimpering in agony, and placed her hands on his shattered arm. She closed her eyes and began to hum, a low, resonant sound that vibrated through the air. This was a healing touch ceremony. "We do not need the toxic industry of modern medicine," she declared to the group. "Their methods are invasive, their chemicals a poison. They profit from sickness. We heal with light. We heal with purity." I stood there, frozen, my heart hammering against my ribs. Every rational part of my brain was screaming that this was wrong, that this was dangerous, that this man needed a doctor. But the group's collective faith was a physical force, a wall of certainty that I couldn't penetrate. To speak out would be to declare myself an apostate, an enemy of the light. It would mean being cast out, back into the rubble of my old life. The fear of that was greater than the horror of what I was witnessing, so I stayed silent. I watched them carry Thomas, pale and sweating, to his room to rest and recover. I never saw him again. The next day, Elara informed us that Thomas had completed his healing journey and had moved on to a higher plane of purity. His absence was not a tragedy. It was an ascension. I was becoming a ghost of myself. My clothes hung on a frame that felt fragile and alien. My bones felt like a bird's cage, brittle and hollow. The constant fatigue was no longer a symptom of malnutrition, but a state of being they called serene. I had not spoken to my family in 3 months. The world outside Port Blossom had ceased to feel real. It was a distant, toxic memory. My reality was the path, the daily rituals, the hunger, the shared delusion. I had learned the language. I had learned the rules. I knew how to smile when I was afraid, how to nod when I was screaming inside. The fear was just another toxin, another impurity to be purged. I was on the path. I was becoming pure, and I was terrified of what that truly meant. Asterisk. The air in the villa grew thinner, charged with an unspoken anticipation. The disappearance of Thomas, or rather his ascension, had left a subtle fracture in the community's serene facade. It wasn't something anyone spoke of, but you could feel it, a quiet hum of anxiety beneath the placid smiles. The yoga sessions became more grueling, the meditation longer, the sharing circles more intense, as if Elara were trying to plaster over the crack with a thicker layer of doctrine. We were all ghosts now, skeletal figures drifting through the sun-drenched halls, our eyes holding a similar, hollowed-out look. We were serene, we were light, we were pure, and we were starving. The gnawing fear in the pit of my stomach had become a constant companion, a cold, hard knot of dread that no amount of herbal tea or chanting could dissolve. I had learned to silence it, to push it down into the dark recesses of my mind where the old Maya still lived, a faint whisper of a forgotten self. But it was always there, a reminder that the ground beneath my feet was not solid ground at all, but a carefully constructed stage, and I was terrified of what would happen when the play was over. The announcement came on a Tuesday evening. We were gathered for the evening sharing circle, the room thick with the scent of incense and melting wax. Alara was seated at the head of the circle, her face illuminated by the candlelight, looking more ethereal and powerful than ever. There was a different energy in the room tonight, a palpable tension. She let the silence stretch, her gaze sweeping over each of us, making us feel both chosen and judged. "My beautiful shining souls," she began, her voice a low, resonant hum. That seemed to vibrate in my very bones. "You have come so far. You have purged so much poison. You have shed the skins of your toxic pasts, layer by layer. You have become so pure." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. A wave of collective pride washed through the group. People straightened at their backs, their faces glowing with adoration. "But there is one final toxin," she continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper, drawing us in. "One final sticky attachment that holds you back from true, ultimate purity. It is the most insidious toxin of all, for it masquerades as your very essence. It is the root of your ego, the anchor to the broken person you once were." She leaned forward, her eyes locking with mine for a heart-stopping second. "It is your name." A collective gasp rippled through the circle. My heart seized. My name, Maya. It was the last piece of myself I had left, the one thing they hadn't yet taken. "The names you carry are scars," Elara declared, her voice rising with fervor. "They are brands given to you by a toxic world, by parents and a society that did not understand your light. They are heavy with the weight of expectation, of failure, of trauma. To achieve ultimate purity, to truly be reborn in the light, you must sever this final attachment. You must shed these old, dead names and be reborn." Her smile was beatific, radiant. "Tonight we will complete our journey. Tonight I will give you your true names, your pure names, names that reflect the light you have become." What happened next was a blur of ritualistic fervor. One by one, each member was called to the center of the circle to kneel before Elara. She would place her hands on their head, close her eyes, and hum for a long moment before bestowing upon them their new identity. A man named David, a former accountant who had lost his family in a car accident, became Solace. A young woman named Chloe, who had confessed to a history of self-harm, became Grace. With each new name, the group would erupt in applause, a wave of ecstatic, joyous sound. The person would return to their cushion, their face wet with tears, their eyes shining with a terrifying, feverish light. They looked broken and remade all at once that my turn came. My legs felt like lead as I walked to the center of the circle. The floorboards creaked beneath my bare feet. I knelt before her, my head bowed, the rough fabric of my linen pants scratching my knees. I could feel every eye in the room on me, a heavy, expectant weight. Her hands, cool and dry, rested on my head. The scent of sandalwood and something else, something metallic and sharp, filled my senses. "Maya," she whispered, and the sound of my own name was a shock, a ghost in the room. "You have fought so hard. You have carried so much pain. But the little bird is ready to fly. Is she not? The cage is broken." I didn't answer. I couldn't. The silent scream in my mind was deafening. "No, I am Maya. My mother gave me that name. It means something. It means me. Your light is bright, but it is flickering," Elara murmured, her thumbs pressing into my temples. "It needs a name to hold. It's steady, a name of pure energy, a name of the sun." She fell silent, and the humming began. It vibrated through my skull, shaking the very foundations of my thoughts, rattling the cage where the real me was trapped. The fear was no longer a knot. It was a living thing, clawing its way up my throat. Then she spoke the word, Lumen. The room exploded in applause. The sound washed over me, a tidal wave of noise that drowned out my own silent protest. I looked up at Elara, at her beatific, terrifying smile. She was looking at me, but she wasn't seeing me. She was seeing her creation. "Welcome, Lumen," she said. I stood up on trembling legs and walked back to my cushion. I sat down. And then my body betrayed me. My hands, acting of their own accord, began to clap. I clapped for the woman next to me, who was no longer Sarah, but Serenity. I clapped for the man across from me, who was no longer Michael, but Ether. I clapped with the rest of them, my face a mask of serene acceptance, the rhythm of the applause echoing the frantic, terrified beating of my own heart. I am no longer Maya. I am Lumen. I write this in a stolen moment, with a stolen pen on a stolen piece of paper. I am thin now, so thin my bones feel like they could snap with a sudden movement. I am always tired, but they call it serene. I am on the path. I am becoming pure. The fear is still here, a cold, silent passenger in this hollow vessel they call Lumen. I push it down. I have to. That fear is just another toxin. And here on the sun-kissed path, the only thing that matters is being clean. Asterisk. Asterisk. My name is Ethan Thorne, and for as long as I can remember, the present has felt like a poorly translated text. As a doctoral candidate in medieval history, my world was one of vellum manuscripts, the faint, dusty scent of archives, and the silent company of long-dead kings and scribes. I lived in a small, book crammed apartment where the glow of my laptop screen was a constant, unwelcome anachronism. My days were spent deciphering the fragmented histories of pre-Christian Germanic tribes, piecing together their beliefs, their laws, and their wars from the scant evidence left behind. I dreamt of a world that felt more solid, a world with more honor, more ritual, more meaning. My own life, with its transient digital friendships, its sterile conveniences, and its overwhelming sense of purposelessness, felt flimsy and fake by comparison. It was during a particularly grueling late-night research session, lost in the digital labyrinth of academic databases, that I found it. I was chasing a footnote about the Carusi, the tribe famous for annihilating 3 Roman legions. In the Teutoburg forest, the trail had gone cold, leading only to paywalled articles and repetitive summaries. Frustrated, I cast a wider net, typing the tribe's name into a standard search engine. Buried on the 3rd page of results, beneath amateur history blogs and fantasy gaming forums, was a link. Bruderschaft to Schnee de Schwarzwalds, the Brotherhood of the Sons of the Black Forest. Curiosity piqued. I clicked. The website was surprisingly professional. It wasn't the garish amateur page I expected. The design was clean, using a stark, runic-inspired font against a backdrop of deep green and charcoal gray. It presented the Brotherhood as a historical reenactment and cultural preservation society dedicated to reviving the lost traditions of the Carusi people. The photo gallery was what truly captivated me. It was filled with high-resolution images of men in authentic-looking period garb leather tunics, woolen trousers, and heavy cloaks fastened with intricate bronze brooches. They were performing complex rituals in the deep woods of upstate New York, their faces illuminated by firelight, holding replica spears and round shields. It was everything I was passionate about, torn from the pages of my books and given breath. I spent hours poring over the site. They had articles on reconstructed Proto-Germanic linguistics, essays on the spiritual significance of the forest, and detailed breakdowns of their craftwork, from blacksmithing to mead brewing. This was no mere hobby. It was a deep, scholarly, and passionate immersion, with a mix of academic excitement and a strange personal yearning. I drafted an email. I introduced myself, my field of study, and complimented the impressive depth of their research and authenticity. I offered to share some of my own findings from obscure monastic chronicles that mentioned Carusi religious practices. I hit send and leaned back, not truly expecting a reply. The response came less than a day later. It was from the group's leader, a man named Alaric. His email was articulate, warm, and deeply engaging. He was not only familiar with the sources I mentioned, but cited several others, asking insightful questions that demonstrated a profound understanding of the subject. He revealed he was a former history professor who had left academia, disillusioned with what he called its sterile intellectualism. He spoke with a fiery passion about the hollowed-out soul of modern man and the desperate need to reconnect with the iron truths of our ancestors. My academic knowledge, he wrote, was not something to be locked away in a dissertation. It was a sacred key. He concluded with an invitation to join them for one of their weekend gatherings. "Come," he wrote, "and see for yourself what it means to live, not just read." The following Friday, I found myself driving north, the gray sprawl of the city giving way to rolling hills and dense forests. The directions Alaric sent led me off the main highway and onto a series of winding country roads, and finally onto a gravel track marked only by a small, carved wooden raven nailed to a tree. As I drove deeper into the woods, my cell service vanished. A primal part of me, long dormant, felt a thrill of anticipation and a tremor of fear. I parked my car in a small, hidden clearing and followed the distant sound of rhythmic hammering. I found them in a large natural amphitheater, towering pines. A dozen men, all powerfully built and focused on their tasks. Some were practicing with swords and shields, the clang of steel echoing through the trees. Others were tending a large fire pit, where a boar was roasting on a spit. The man who approached me was clearly Alaric. He was in his late 50s, tall and broad-shouldered, with a thick gray beard and piercing blue eyes. He wore a simple leather tunic, but he carried himself with an innate authority that was more commanding than any suit or title. "Ethan," he said, his voice a low baritone. He clasped my hand in a grip of iron. "Welcome to the Schwartz First." The men of the Brotherhood were intense and disciplined, yet they welcomed me without hesitation. They weren't the boorish thugs or social outcasts I might have secretly feared. They were craftsmen, veterans, and professionals who, like me, felt a profound disconnect from the modern world. They listened with rapt attention as Alaric introduced me, framing my academic work not as a dry pursuit, but as a vital link to the very soul they were trying to reclaim. For the first time in my life, I felt that my passion had a tangible, real-world purpose. I wasn't just an observer of the past. I was a participant in its rebirth. That weekend was a revelation. The reenactments were unlike anything I could have imagined. We trained with swords and spears under the guidance of a former soldier named Gunnar, his instructions brutally practical. We learned to track deer in the woods, to build shelters from fallen branches, to identify edible plants. It was physically demanding, exhausting work that left my muscles screaming, but it made me feel vibrantly alive. The true heart of the experience, however, was the rituals. As dusk fell, we would gather around the great bonfire, the flames leaping towards the canopy of stars. Dressed in our ritual garb, we would pass around a drinking horn filled with potent homemade mead. Alaric, acting as the Gothi or priest, would lead us in chants, his voice rising and falling in the reconstructed cadences of their ancient tongue. We recited sagas from memory, their tales of gods and heroes taking on a profound weight in the flickering firelight. It felt more real, more significant than any lecture hall or library. During one of these fireside gatherings, Alaric explained his core philosophy. "These are not mere performances," he said, his eyes scanning the faces of the men around him. "These are acts of ancestral communion. The soul of a people, their spirit, does not simply vanish. It is encoded in our blood, in our very bones. By perfectly replicating their rituals, their words, their trials, by living as they lived, we can tap into that collective spirit. We can feel what they felt, know what they knew, and draw upon their strength. I was mesmerized. It was a radical, intoxicating idea, a bridge between the spiritual and the historical. It gave our actions a transcendent purpose. We weren't just playing dress-up. We were engaging in a sacred act of resurrection. That night, as I lay in my tent, the sounds of the forest a living presence around me, I felt a sense of belonging. So profound it was almost painful. The flimsy, fake world I had left behind already seemed like a distant dream. I wasn't just studying the past anymore. I was helping to build its future. Asterisk. Asterisk. The months that followed were a complete immersion. I structured my life around the Brotherhood's weekend gatherings, my PhD work becoming a secondary concern, a mere footnote to the vibrant reality I was experiencing in the Schwartzfirst. My advisor noted my distraction, commenting on my unfocused dissertation chapters, but I dismissed his concerns. How could he understand? He saw history as a collection of dead facts, while I was living it, breathing it. The forest became my true university, Alaric my true mentor. My apartment in the city felt like a foreign country, a place I visited out of obligation. The real me, the essential Ethan, only came alive amidst the pines. The scent of wood smoke in my hair and the weight of a shield on my arm. It was during this period that the line between our reenactments and what Alaric called lived reality began to dissolve, the seam between them fraying so slowly I barely noticed. The change began subtly. Alaric started introducing elements into our rituals that I couldn't trace to any historical text. During one fireside sermon, he spoke not of ancestral communion, but of blood memory. He claimed that the memories and instincts of our Carusi ancestors were not just a spiritual pool to draw from, but a literal biological inheritance dormant in our DNA. The modern world, with its comfort and its noise, has put this memory to sleep, he declared, his voice resonating with conviction. Our purpose is to reawaken it, to unlock the warrior who sleeps within the flesh of the office worker, the student, the mechanic. To facilitate this awakening, he introduced a series of purity tests. At first, they seemed like logical extensions of our historical training. We fasted for days on end, subsisting on nothing but water from the forest streams. Alaric framed it as historical authenticity. Our ancestors endured famine, he would say, his own stomach rumbling along with ours. To know their spirit, we must know their hunger. We were made to endure exposure to the biting cold of late autumn nights, huddled together in thin woolen cloaks, our bodies shivering uncontrollably. This is the iron that tempers the soul, Alaric would chant, his breath pluming in the frigid air. Then came the ritual combat. It was no longer the controlled, technical sparring we had practiced with Gunnar. Alaric called it Holmgang, the duel of honor. Men were pitted against each other with blunted, but still heavy steel swords and solid oak shields. There were no points, no time limits. The combat ended only when one man yielded or was unable to continue. The sessions were brutal, leaving men bruised, exhausted, and often bloodied. I remember watching Gunnar, the stoic ex-soldier, break another man's rib with a vicious shield bash. The crack echoed in the silent woods. The injured man was helped away, gasping for breath, but there was no malice in Gunnar's eyes, only a grim satisfaction. Later, around the fire, Alaric placed a hand on both men's shoulders. "Pain purges weakness," he said. "Your blood, spilled on this sacred ground, awakens the memory of the soil. You are becoming them." My academic mind, the part of me that still clung to footnotes and peer-reviewed sources, screamed in protest. This wasn't in any text. This was a perversion, a dangerous escalation. Yet another part of me, the part that had felt so hollow for so long, was enthralled. The pain was real. The exhaustion was real. The blood was real. In a world that felt fake, this brutal reality was a powerful anchor. When I survived a 36-hour fast or pushed through the pain of a sparring session, I felt an undeniable sense of accomplishment, of belonging to an elite group capable of enduring what modern men could not. We were forging ourselves into something new, something harder. Alaric's charisma was the glue that held it all together. He had a gift for weaving my historical knowledge into his new, darker tapestry. He would ask me to recount the details of a Carusi ambush or a specific religious rite, and then he would twist it, infusing it with his own mythology. "You see," he would say to the others, gesturing towards me, "Ethan's books tell us what they did. The blood tells us why. He holds the letter of the law. We hold its spirit." I became his prized scholar, the living proof that their practices were rooted in ancient truth, even as they spiraled away from it. My desire for his approval, for the respect of these men, overrode my scholarly objections. I was complicit in my own deception. The true turning point, the moment the path darkened irrevocably, came with the talk of the Fenrirs. In the Norse sagas, Fenrir was a monstrous wolf, a harbinger of Ragnarok. In Alaric's new gospel, the Fenrirs were not mythological beasts. They were a rival tribe, a corrupted bloodline that had survived into the modern day, plotting in the shadows. "They are the eternal enemy," Alaric explained one evening, his face a mask of grim seriousness. "The wolf that preys on the flock. They did not die out. They adapted. They shed their skins and now walk among us, disguised as ordinary people working to undermine and pollute the very soul of our world." He started pointing them out. A politician on the news advocating for globalism was a Fenrir, seeking to dissolve tribal bonds. A corporate CEO whose company outsourced jobs was a Fenrir, weakening the folk from within. He even began to identify them in the nearby town, the librarian who promoted degenerate modern literature. the town council member who approved a new housing development that encroached on the forest. The language became more venomous, more paranoid. The other members of the Brotherhood, their minds primed by the purity tests and the rhetoric of blood memory, began to see them too. Conversations around the fire shifted from historical debates to hateful diatribes about the wolves in sheep's clothing who were poisoning society. The world was no longer just empty. It was actively hostile, populated by a hidden enemy. I tried to rationalize it. I told myself it was a metaphor, a psychological tool to build group cohesion, an allegorical enemy to unite us. How could a former history professor truly believe this? But as I watched the faces of the other men, I saw no metaphor in their eyes. I saw genuine, burning hatred. I saw a terrifying certainty. They spoke of the people in the town with a cold fury, as if they were discussing a pest to be exterminated. The camaraderie that had once felt so welcoming now had a sharp, dangerous edge. It was the unity of the pack, bonded by a shared prey. The world was being divided into two simple categories, the Brotherhood and the Fenris. There was no room for anything in between. My own world, once defined by nuance and complexity, was being flattened into a brutal binary conflict. And I, the historian, the man of books and contemplation, was standing right on the fault line. Asterisk. The paralysis of disbelief held me captive for days. I returned to my apartment after that weekend, the city's noise and lights feeling like a flimsy stage set for a play I no longer had the script for. I tried to work on my dissertation, but the Latin phrases and historical accounts of long-dead tribes seemed absurdly irrelevant. The world of footnotes and citations was a ghost world. The real world was in the Schwartz first, where men with hate in their eyes were cleaning rifles. My attempts to rationalize Alric's rhetoric as metaphor now felt like a pathetic, desperate self-delusion. A metaphor does not have a firing pin. An allegory does not leave a spent cartridge. The memory of last weekend's ritual played on. A loop in my mind, a film I was forced to watch over and over. It had started like any other. We gathered as dusk bled through the trees, the air thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. But there was a new tension in the air, a coiled energy. That was different from the usual focused discipline. The men were quieter, their eyes constantly scanning the shadows, as if expecting an attack. We didn't pass the mead horn or recite the sagas. Instead, Alaric led us deeper into the woods than we had ever gone before, to a place dominated by a massive, flat-topped boulder that looked disturbingly like a sacrificial altar. He gathered us in a tight circle. The firelight cast deep shadows across his face, making his features seem carved from stone. The time for communion is over. He began, his voice low and guttural, devoid of its usual professorial warmth. The ancestors have been awakened. They have heard our calls. They have accepted our offerings of pain and sweat. But they are not satisfied with echoes. They demand action. The time for action is here. He spoke of the great hunt. He wasn't talking about tracking deer anymore. He was talking about cleansing the land of the Fenris who lived among us. He named them again: the librarian, the town council member, even a specific state trooper who had once pulled him over for speeding. In his telling, these were not people. They were monsters, a spiritual plague. And then one of the men, a quiet mechanic named Rolf, stepped forward and opened a long, canvas-wrapped bundle. He didn't pull out replica spears or axes. He laid out modern hunting rifles, shotguns, and several handguns that blued steel gleaming coldly in the FIRELIGHT. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. The final, undeniable break from reality. This wasn't reenactment. This wasn't a game. This was conspiracy to commit violence. Alaric picked up a rifle, its form sleek and deadly in his hands. It was a jarring, obscene juxtaposition against his Carusi garb. Our ancestors used the best weapons available to them, he said, his voice rising to a fever pitch. They fought with iron and steel, not bronze. We will honor them by doing the same. We will use the tools of this age to wage the eternal war. His eyes had a wild, fervent gleam I had never seen before, a terrifying blend of madness and absolute certainty. The spirits of our ancestors are demanding a real sacrifice, a real hunt to purify this forest and send a message to the other wolves that this is our territory. Then his gaze fell upon me. The firelight seemed to converge on his face, his eyes pinning me in place. "Ethan," he said, and the entire group turned to look at me. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crackling flames. Your arrival was not an accident. Your knowledge of the old ways was a sign from the gods themselves. You were sent to be our skald, our chronicler. You will record our victory, so that future generations will know the day the sons of the Black Forest began to take back what was stolen from them. The men around the fire were no longer the welcoming craftsmen and veterans I had met months ago. Their faces were masks of cold, righteous fury. They were not playing a part. They believed. They truly, utterly believed they were ancient warriors, preparing for a holy war against a pack of monsters disguised as their neighbors. I saw my role with horrifying clarity. I was the scholar, the legitimizer. My academic credentials were the stamp of authenticity on their madness. I had given them the historical vocabulary for their hate, the ancient justifications for their modern violence. I was their prophet, whether I wanted to be or not. To refuse was to declare myself an enemy. To refuse was to become a Fenrir. I don't remember what I said. I think I just nodded, a single jerky motion. A roar of approval went up from the men. They clapped me on the back, their hands feeling like stones. They passed me a rifle, and its weight in my hands was sickening, a cold, heavy promise of what was to come. I am supposed to go with them on the hunt next week. That is in 2 days. My car is still parked in the hidden clearing, but I know they watch the gravel road. My phone shows no service, and the nearest town is miles away on foot. Through a forest, they know better than I know the back of my hand. I am a historian. I study the past. My entire life has been a retreat into the safety of bygone eras, a way to escape a present I found meaningless. But I was wrong. The past is not a safe country. It is not dead. I stumbled into a part of it that never died, a vein of ancient, tribal hatred that has festered in the dark for centuries, and now it is woken up. It has a name, it has a face, and it is hungry. I am the chronicler, tasked with writing the first chapter of their new, bloody saga. I just don't know if I will live to write the end of it. Asterisk.